Okay, assalamu alaikum. Hope you're all well. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. All right, let's see who we have in the chat and get this started. So I had somebody here, Azur Naja. Well, hopefully they said they're in a meeting, but they want to come on later and ask a few questions. I'll try and hang around definitely for that. Oh, the meeting starts in 2 hours, 40 minutes. Okay. Yeah, I could still be around for that. We'll see. Assalamu alaikum, Geralt of Rabia. Assalamu alaikum. I've heard about the CEI program that Sheikh Babikir and others run yearly in London. Wondering if you know about it, would recommend. Not sure what the CEI stands for. But yeah, I mean, I know Sheikh Babikir. I've known him for a very long time. Absolutely wonderful man. I wouldn't, there's few shuyukh I would recommend that you'd spend time around, like him and maybe a few others. You can definitely learn a lot from him. He's for those who don't know, he's a Sudanese Sufi sheikh in London. He runs a few dhikr or remembrance circles in London, and I used to attend them very regularly. Yeah, I mean, there's other things I could say, but I'd rather keep the recommendations above any hesitations, I would say. Assalamu alaikum, Hassan. Assalamu alaikum, Nazur. Okay, assalamu alaikum. One of the people who've been in your Twitter replied recently. I've been listening to you for a good time now. No problem. Assalam. If you want, you can come on before the presentation. So, if I see you backstage or just send me a message, you can come on and then we can do the presentation afterwards. I think you're talking about the retreat they do. Maybe the retreat they do. They do these retreats they're in Spain usually, not in London. Anyway, let me get on to what I want to present to you all today. And please don't mind the noise in the background. Children still not asleep. So let me get my presentation running. Okay, here we are. So what I want to discuss today is ijram and mujrimeen in the Qur'an. So I've mentioned it before that I wanted to talk about this this word or this category of people, which is mentioned quite often in the Qur'an, actually, especially in the earlier surahs. I noticed less so in the later ones. Quite a lot in the earlier surahs, and that could be related to what I'm going to say about it here. But it's very, very key. It's a key piece of vocabulary. Now I've mentioned before, Quranic terminology. There are things there are some which I've named like the big five, basically, which I would say you would not be able to understand the Quran. You won't understand. If you don't understand them Quranically, you just don't understand the Quran at all, right? The main one, of course, which most people get wrong, is kufr, right? And by extension, shukr, which in the Quran is its opposite, right? So kufr and shukr, I've sort of put them as one, right? Together. Then there's iman, shirk, taqwa, and ibadah, right? These are the main ones. I think that if you get get good grips of those terms, as they are Quranically, you'll be able to have a pretty firm grasp on the Quran. And there are others which I've added before. Sometimes I say the big seven, right? Add three more. So dua, right? And ilah and nifaq, right? And mostly it's in this order. I mean, these are not they're kind of in the order which I think are more important, right? So definitely these are the most important, and then these other 3 are very important as well. But I don't think they hamstring your understanding of the Quran by not knowing them as well. Okay, I mean, they are still very important. And then you can add another 3 and say the big 10, and one of them is ijram, right? The mujrimeen. So ijram and fisq and dhikr, right? So these are some very key terms in the Quran, right? If you get to know them, they help a lot, right? And many of these are just not known as they should be Quranically, right? Like taqwa, like kufr, iman, shirk definitely as well, ibadah even, right? And then dua as well. Even ilah is not. People don't get it quite right. Nifaq, it's just trivialized as just being basically two-faced. And then you've got fisq, which is related to nifaq. We've discussed that before. إن المنافقون هم الفاسقون. The Quran says truly the fasiqun are the munafiqun. The munafiqun are fasiqun. Sorry, and then you've got dhikr, right? But today we're going to look at ijram and mujrimeen. Now, generally, colloquially, for any Arabic speakers, the word is usually just used to mean criminals, right? We use it generally to mean criminals. Ijram is a crime, and we're talking about things like murder, theft, rapes, these kind of things. Okay, and ijram is a crime for which you can be punished, like legally, right, and be punished by prison or the like, hung or killed or whatever it is, right? It isn't typically thought of like a personal sin, right? So if somebody did a personal sin somewhere, you wouldn't say he didn't. He was guilty of some ijram or he's one of the mujrimeen for that. Okay, so that generally isn't it. It's usually pretty much straight as it means in English, as in criminals, right? Crimes, people who do crimes, right? Which we talk about that. It's usually something public which affects other people, right? So how accurate is that impression Quranically? And the answer is not as accurate, especially in where it does actually give us some good examples of it, right? The main one which we are all aware of, maybe not aware of this example because it comes in the next verse, which everybody on this channel and most Quranists are aware of, right? The verse which says, and the messenger will say on the day of judgment, basically, "Oh my Lord, indeed my people have abandoned this Qur'an," right? Have taken as a thing abandoned, have done hijrah, right? From this Qur'an, mahjura, it's something mahjur, something abandoned, you leave it, right? You do hijrah from it to something else, right? And of course, the main issue is hijrah from the Qur'an to narrations and opinions of others, etc., right? So abandoning the Qur'an for something else, right? And this will be the complaint, the main and only complaint that we have in the Quran of the Prophet on the Day of Judgment. He will say, "Oh my Lord, my people have taken this Quran as a thing that can just be abandoned. We can just leave it for something else," right? But the next verse, and I mentioned this in, I think in my part 2 reaction video to Jonathan Brown. The next part gives you something else. It says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا مِنَ الْمُجْرِمِينَ, right? And thus have we made for every prophet an enemy from among the mujrimeen. Now here in the Sahih International it says criminals, right? And the verse ends, "But sufficient is your Lord as a guide and a helper. وَكَفَى بِرَبِّكَ هَادِيًا وَنَصِيرًا." Right? The God Himself, He's still able to guide despite the mujrimeen, right? Pixel has instead of criminals, I noticed, he has opponents, okay, which is more accurate, right? Because what's happening here is, of course, the Prophet wants people to follow the Quran, but they are not. Why? Because of what the mujrimeen have done. The enemy to the Prophet here, the enemy to the Messenger, and what he brought are the mujrimeen. They are the one who are causing people to abandon the Quran. They are the ones who are causing people to move away from the Quran to other than the Quran. Those are the mujrimeen, right? Now that doesn't sound, of course, like just a murderer, a thief, a rapist. They're not the ones who are going to be causing others to move away from the Quran. So we're talking about something else. We're talking about different type of crime, right? We're not talking about that kind of criminality. Okay, we're talking about something else. The ijram here is something which perverts or takes people away from revelation. Okay, that is ijram. Okay, and even despite this ijram, your Lord is sufficient as a guide and a helper, right? So that's what it is. So I wrote here, so the mujrimeen are the enemy of prophethood, of divine guidance, and the cause of people abandoning the Quran. So how do they do this? Okay, so it isn't by murder or theft, but by what? By fraud, right? And so you have this verse, which is meant to mirror this previous verse. So, just as here it says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًا, and thus have we made for every prophet enemies. And it says here, it says his enemies are from the mujrimeen. Well, this next verse starts exactly the same way, right? It says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًا, and thus have we made for every prophet enemies. But this time, so these enemies are going to be the same. They are mujrimeen as well. They are the mujrimeen, right? But here it's showing what they do, okay, and describing them more. First of all, it calls them shayateen al-ins wal-jinn. They are devils from among ins and jinn. What do they do? يُوحِي بَعْضُهُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ زُخْرُفَ الْقَوْلِ غُرُورًا. They inspire one to the other decorative speech to delude, right? To take people away. So it's by delusion. Right? The ijram is done by delusion. These decorative words, right? They inspire words to each other that they use through which they will deceive, right? زخرف القول غرورا. Embellished words of deceit, you can call it, right? وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ مَا فَعَلُوهُ. And if your Lord had willed, they would not have done it. Yeah, Allah could have stopped them. فَذَرْهُمْ وَمَا يَفْتَرُونَ. So leave them and that which they what? Invent, right? So they're inventing, they are making things up. And that mirrors exactly what we're talking about here. That the messenger will say, oh my Lord, my people have abandoned the Qur'an. What have they abandoned it for? They've abandoned it for the things which the mujrimeen have invented. Okay? They have abandoned it for the things which the mujrimeen have invented and created. Okay, but Allah is saying, leave them, right? Leave it, right? Let it be. Why is the Prophet, Allah commanding the Prophet here to just let it be, right? Let that invention and stuff, let it be, right? Because God will use it in a purpose. It says, وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ وَلِيَرْضَوْهُ وَلِيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. It's so that the hearts of those who have no faith in the Akhirah may incline to it. Incline to what? Incline to this ahadith, to this zukhruf al-qawl ghurura, right? They will incline to that stuff, right? And they'll be pleased with it. وَلِيَرْضَوْهُ. They'll be happy with it, pleased, satisfied with this deception, right? With these things. وَلِيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. And so that they will do what they are doing, do what they want to do, right? So they will use that to do what they want, right? To follow that evil path. They will have basically an excuse to follow an evil path, right? Because this world is a test, right? And the people of evil are given a chance to even to follow their ways, right? The way of evil is there. It's not going to be obliterated in this world, right? It's always going to be there, so that whoever wants to take it can take it. وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. So Hassan al-Maliki calls this basically. He says, I remember him telling us, al-ijram fil Quran amal thaqafi. That ijram in the Quran is like it's cultural work, right? It's trying to change the intellectual surrounding. It's trying to falsify things. It's trying to create that kind of fraud. It's trying to change the cultural mindset of people. Right, it's work in that field, right? It isn't, so much physical crimes, right? You can call it, إجرام معلوماتية, it's just crimes done on with respect to information, right? That kind of stuff. Which is why, when I titled this, I called it like fraudsters, right? You can sort of like say that the mujrimeen are fraudsters, right? Scammers, right? Because fraud and fraud and scamming are also crimes, right? So the point is, of course, that you are meant to equate the mujrimeen with those in this verse, right? So these two verses mirror each other. This one basically expands on what the mujrimeen do, right, and how they take people away from the Quran, right, or divine revelation. Because of course, you've had mujrimeen standing against every prophet, right? Every prophet has had mujrimeen, as this verse says, that the mujrimeen inspiring words of deceit so that whoever wants to take it will take it. Okay, so another verse which goes into that. This verse here, so I've put the verse before it as well, just because it is a bit relevant. So it says, قُلْ لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا تَلَوْتُهُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَا أَدْرَاكُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ لَبِثْتُ فِيكُمْ عُمَرًا مِنْ قَبْلِهِ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Say, O Muhammad, say to them, if Allah had willed, I would not have recited it to you. I wouldn't have recited this Quran to you. Nor would He have made me know it. وَلَا أَدْرَاكُمْ بِهِ. Right? I don't like this translation so much. Nor would He have made it known to you. Right? For indeed I had remained among you a lifetime before it. Will you not reason? Right? So basically, it's saying, if God had wanted, I would not be reciting this Quran. Right? I've been alive among you for so long. Right? Remember, He got the revelation, above 40. Right? So, will you not reason? Right? I'm not just suddenly making things up. That's the idea. I'm not suddenly making things up. And which is why it's relevant to the next verse, which talks about mujrimeen. So it says, so who is more unjust than he who invents a lie about Allah or denies His signs? Indeed, the criminals, according to this translation, but of course, mujrimeen. Indeed, the mujrimeen will not succeed. So according to this verse, what do mujrimeen do? They invent lies, right? فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا, right? That the mujrimeen, they invent lies upon Allah, right? And sort of basically the previous verse is basically saying, I'm not of the mujrimeen, right? The Prophet is being told to say to them, I'm not suddenly now going to be of the mujrimeen, inventing lies against Allah, right? In my older years. So again, this verse is linking ijram with those who falsify revelations, of those who invent lies against Allah, those who invent lies. But not just any lies and any fraud, but lies specifically made to turn truth into falsehood, to turn it on its head. And we see that in some of the other verses. So here's another one. لِيُحِقَّ الْحَقِّ, sorry, doesn't mention Allah here, but it's He who's doing it, that He may establish the truth. لِيُحِقَّ الْحَقِّ, so that He make the haqq, right? وَيُبْطِلَ الْبَاطِلَ, and make the batil, the falsehood, batil, right? وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُجْرِمُونَ, even though the mujrimun dislike it, even though the mujrimun, hate it, even though the mujrimun don't like that the haqq be seen as haqq and the batil be seen as batil. They don't like that the truth be seen as truth and that the falsehood be seen as falsehood. Why don't they like it, right? Why is this said specifically about the mujrimeen? Because they are actually engaged in the opposite, right? They're engaged in establishing falsehoods and abolishing truths, and trying to establish falsehood as truth and truth as falsehood, right? So that's the idea here, and that's why the mujrimeen is being mentioned in this space, basically. And it's only mujrimeen mentioned with that, right? Because we have another verse very similar, يُحِقَّ اللَّهُ الْحَقَّ بِكَلِمَاتِهِ, so that Allah will establish the truth by His words, right? Again, يُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ, to make the haqq by His kalimat, by his words. وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُجْرِمُونَ, even if the criminals dislike it, even though the mujrimeen, hate it. Okay? So again, why would they hate that? They hate that because they are trying to do the opposite, because this undoes what they are doing. Okay? So that's the main idea between ijram, right? That's our main idea in ijram, at least the pinnacle idea of ijram in the Quran, right? The thing about it, there's not too much which is in terms of the actual deeds, which is completely linked with it, other than this, right? The main thing which ijram is linked with in the Quran, if you look for specific examples, is this kind of thing, is this kind of falsehood, right? Falsifying things, inventing things, right? So here's another example of that. This is in the story of Qarun, right? In the story of Musa, the one who was given all this wealth, Qarun. So he had all of this wealth that even the keys to his like treasure chests or whatever, they were themselves were so heavy. Right? The keys themselves were so heavy that needed like a bunch of men to carry them. What did he say? Right? He says, قال إنما أوتيته على علم عندي. He said, I was only given it because of knowledge I have. Right? So this is him falsifying things, inventing a lie. Right? He's saying, well, I've got this knowledge, right? And that's why I'm so wealthy. Right? I have some special knowledge, and that is why I have, so much wealth. Maybe he meant over here, I have special knowledge from Allah, or something like that, right? But the point is, he's falsifying, right? And so the verse continues. أَوَلَمْ يَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ أَهْلَكَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنَ الْقُرُونِ مَنْ هُوَ أَشَدُّ مِنْهُ قُوَّةً وَأَكْثَرُ جَمْعًا. Did he not know that Allah had destroyed before him of generations those who were greater than him in power and greater in accumulation, of wealth? And then the verse ends, وَلَا يُسْأَلُ عَنْ ذُنُوبِهِمُ الْمُجْرِمُونَ. But the mujrimun, about their sins, will not be asked, right? The mujrimun will not even have to be asked about their sins, right? Of course, that's rhetorical, but it's still a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting phrase. The mujrimeen will not be asked about their sins, right? If we were to take that more, less rhetorically and more sort of literally, what would that mean? That would mean that it's not so much their own sins which will condemn them, right? That it's how they lead other people astray, right? وَلَا يُسْأَلُ عَنْ ذُنُوبِهِمْ الْمُجْرِمُونَ. That the mujrimun are not going to be asked about their own sins, right? They're going to be asked about the ijram that they did, which misguided so many others, right? Generations or hundreds of thousands. I mean, just think of the lies which are in hadith books, right? Those were made by mujrimun, right? And so many sins are done in accordance with them, right? People taking those hadith and running with them. And so, the mujrimeen might be asked about the effects of their ijram rather than their own sins. Okay, so the last thing I'd just like to mention is I don't think it's confined, even though I can't find many other examples. Like I can't find examples in the Quran of mujrimun doing the crimes that we typically mention, right? Like murder or theft of these things, right? I haven't come across that, right? But that doesn't mean that it's not those type of crimes are not ijram, right? It just means that perhaps the pinnacle ijram that the Quran wants to emphasize are these things, right? So in all, Quranically, when we think about mujrimeen, we need to think about what I've talked about here, basically religious fraudsters, right? Those who invent lies upon Allah, those who try to make the haqq seem like batil and the batil like haqq, right? These are the mujrimeen which are mainly meant in the Quran, right? As far as I can see. When it comes up generally in other verses, so the word just comes up generally talking about mujrimeen, maybe you could say it includes, all those other forms of crimes as well, because it does sometimes just mention mujrimeen as generally. those are the people who are going to hell, right? Because of what they've done, right? So the word and title is used in many other verses, especially in the earlier surahs, at a glance. But it isn't always easy to puzzle out what exactly the ijram is. Often it just seems general, right? So I'm not rejecting that ijram can include sins like murder, theft, and the like, but I'm saying it includes religious fraudsters and deceivers who cast doubt, who invent lies, who try to invert revelation and make the truth to be falsehood and falsehood appear to be truth, right? So that's the main thing. And the final note is about a linguistic note. So doubt, right? So we have this phrase which comes up in the Quran, la jarama, like la jarama annahum fil akhirati humul akhsarun. No doubt in the akhirah they will be among the biggest losers, right? This phrase, no doubt. So it comes up around 5 times in the Quran, and the word used for doubt shares the same root as mujrim, right? So la jarama, jim ra mim, right? The same root as for mujrimeen, okay? So that's the word being used for doubt. So this could be an indication, which again will fit well with the idea of them being fraudsters and scammers who invert truth from falsehood, that their key weapon or their foothold is doubt. That how do they begin this thing is by making you doubt, right? They start by creating some doubt and suspicion, and from there they will start to, from that starting point, they start to invert things, right? To invert the truth. So you see that a little bit with new converts, right? And how sort of like the Sunni paradigm is brought to them, right? So fresh converts will sometimes have very innocent kind of questions. Hey, why do we need all of these hadith? I came to Islam because of the Quran, right? The Quran was amazing to me, and because I read it and it filled my heart with faith, and now I've converted, and now you're suddenly telling me I need this, and this, and this, right? And so what do? They start giving doubts, right? Yes, but the Quran, the Quran won't teach you how to pray, will it? And it won't do this, and it won't do this, and they start to put in these doubts, right? And so those doubts take hold, and then afterwards the inversion begins, right? Oh, you're right. Yes, the Quran doesn't show me exactly how to pray, so that means I need this, and I need this, and I need this, and I need the other thing, right? So that's basically the idea that I wanted to present to you all today. Okay. Let's see who we have online. All right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Adriana. Good to see you again. Alhamdulillah, I've been working. I hope you guys are okay. I feel kind of guilty, but I am here. I'm still a believer. Yes, alhamdulillah. May Allah give you increase in faith and make life easy for you and for everybody else. All right. Now, I do want to stay as long as I can for our guy here to come back and see if he can join us. In the meantime, you might have noticed when I made this this stream, I put in the thumbnail. I put a thumbnail with the two memes on it, right? So the one meme of the fat sort of politician guy telling the white guy to be careful of that immigrant. He wants your cookie, right? And the politician guy has like a whole plate of cookies in front of him. And the white working guy has only got one cookie, right? So I think that's a good example of right now some ijram that's happening right now, especially in the UK and places like this. I mean, Elon Musk right now is doing a crazy job of ijram, right? Really is, right? Completely. I don't know what he was doing. He's like tweeting every day about about, he's literally trying to create a civil war in the UK, trying to get people to go out and riot and, and fight and take back your country and all of this, right? And the whole thing, there's so much conflating going on between Muslims and immigrants, as if every immigrant is a Muslim, right? So that's an example, I think, the al-Vijaran that's happening now, right? So, these kind of like deceptions and inversions of truth, and scamming people, basically, right? This like Hassan Maliki said, it's amal thaqafi, right? Trying to change the cultural mindset of people, right, deliberately, right, and in a sort of criminal way. So there's that, and then there's also the ijram, of the Zionists. I mean, they have been supremely successful in ijram, right? They've convinced, they had it still is now, to be honest, but they've had the Western world convinced of that, of every single crime that they've done, that it's actually been the Palestinians who have been doing it, right, or the Muslims or the Arabs, right? That line that people say, every accusation is a confession. It's absolutely true, right? Just take for example the terrorism that came to the Middle East. It was invented by Zionists, right? So they were the first ones to do to bomb cafes and marketplaces, and the King David Hotel and all of these things, right? But somehow the West got to learn, or got to think, that these things were Muslim specific. They were Palestinian first, and then Arabs who did this kind of thing, who did these kind of terrorist attacks that blew up cafes and restaurants and marketplaces and stuff. No, it was invented by Zionists. They're the first ones who did that sort of stuff. But that's the ijram, right? Mujrimeen. They invent the lie, and they cast the doubt, invent the lie, change the truth to falsehood, and the falsehood to truth. So that's the reason for those two pictures in the thumbnail. One of them was, a Zionist trying to basically, like two towers of, one with a Christian at the top, one with a Muslim at the top, and trying to keep them separate, pushing them away, right? Which is absolutely, again, that's something which is absolutely true. Generally, you find that the Christians would have the most sympathy for the Muslims, right? And so they want to like push that away, keep that away, prevent the Muslims and Christians having any kind of like unity or care for each other. Anyway, that's that. Yeah, Netanyahu is like evil in human flesh. Alaikum assalam, brother. Yes, I'm doing good. Thank you so much. All right, okay. I don't have anyone with me backstage. To be honest, I don't have much more to say right now. This is what the meeting is. About 23 minutes now. I don't know whether to just leave the stream running, and anybody who wants to eventually join, maybe get on with some other work in the meantime. Because I don't want to just have this stream just running on for an extra sort of like hour or something with nothing happening in it. So if anybody would like to jump on, that'd be good to have. I'll tell you what could be interesting. Let's go into, because I was actually having a sort of like a discussion on Twitter. Let me stop sharing the screen so I could sort of reply to these things in real time. Maybe just have some content here, as they say. So hold on, let me. No, that's not what I want. You share. Let me share this. Okay, let me see what's somebody wrote it back. What are your thoughts about the Book of Mormons? Is it another kitab after the Quran? How to know? So I don't know anything about the Book of Mormons. I've never tried to read it. The things which I've heard, just secondhand, not from Mormons, which it's always not a good idea to try to learn about your religion from other than the people of that religion, right? So I've never read it, but it seems like a very bizarre story, right? The golden plates, and what's his name, Joseph Smith, right? The guy who is their prophet. Well, I think so. He's a prophet for them, right? So I don't know anything about it. I've never read it. Have you read it? Has anybody actually read something of the Book of Mormons? Is there anything in it which is worthwhile? So I wouldn't know. I mean, just generally the idea of somebody receiving some, but it isn't about revelation. I think that the story about it isn't one of revelation, is it? It's that these were like ancient golden tablets that were from Jesus' time or something, right? That got sent over to the US and rediscovered, right? That's the idea, I think, behind it. But generally, the idea of others receiving revelation after the Quran, that's not something which is antithetical to the Quran, right? So the Quran does mention wahi going to those who are not even prophets, right? So the asbat of Bani Israel, right? They received wahi. So did the Hawariyun of Isa, so the disciples of Isa, right? They did receive wahi as well, and others, the mother of Musa and others as well. So wahi is still open, right? People receiving wahi is still open. So there's not an issue with that. I think you would just judge. Let's say there's somebody who comes along and says, "I have a new book from Allah." You judge it as you judge anything else. I wouldn't believe anybody who says that they were a messenger or a prophet, right? A messenger or prophet, because again, Quran tells us that Allah is not going to send any more messengers or prophets, right? It's basically, Khatam al-Nabiyyin, and that's it, right? But wahi, I'm not, again, that's different. And wahi is a little bit different from tanzil, right? So the Quran is a tanzil, it's a revelation, it's something being sent down. It's not just inspiration, right? It's something that was sent down. Would it be interesting to have a stream in which we discuss moral dilemmas, and how would one answer them from Islamic perspective? Yeah, I suppose it would be, but the thing about it, when it comes to some moral dilemmas, things for which there is no explicit revelation, sort of like in the Quran, an explicit verse, otherwise it wouldn't be a dilemma. It has to be something else. They are going to be in the test of our morality, right? Of our ability to ascertain the truth. Istabiqul khairat, vie with one another in goodness, right? So our ability to be able to get to the best morality is part of this world's test, right? That there's the things which are obviously good and the things which are obviously wicked, right? And those things, everybody should be able to, recognize them, stay away from the obviously evil, do the obviously good. But it's in sort of like those gray areas where we sort of like get to compete with one another, right? ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون. The Quran says, let those who are, who'd like to compete. So I mean, I don't know how much could discuss them and see, I suppose. I read some pieces. It reminds me of biblical stories. Yeah, I think that's what it is, right? It's biblical stories. All right, let's have a look at. So, let me just try to get to the original tweet. So this is one of those those meme things that everybody puts a question about it. What opinion about whatever would have you in this sort of position where everybody just wants to attack you? So somebody put in, what opinion about atheists will have you like this? That's why I put in what you guys all already know. Certainly before atheists can go to heaven, quote unquote, right? God cares about your deeds and will never punish you for sincerely held wrong beliefs. That's just literally retarded. Maybe I shouldn't have said retarded. But anyway, so of course I got ended up having a bunch of replies on this. And while we wait for our guy to come back on, maybe I can get back and try to address some of. I was having a few conversations about this with a few people. Some of them, of course, always start rude, but it is what it is. So this is the interesting one, the whole thing about ijma', right? So rejecting ijma' is itself misguidance, right? So this guy, Hudud, I suppose, says that. And it says calling riba. So this wasn't something else, actually, a different thing. It was this video of somebody ranting about how mortgage is haram. And yes, mortgage has riba in it, and riba is haram. But the issue is that now you will never be able to own a home without taking a mortgage, right? You just can't be done, right? So it becomes a necessity. It becomes permissible because it's a necessity. This idea that spend the rest of your life not paying rent and not owning a home that you can leave behind for your parents, that just leaves Muslims in a weak position. The world is the way it is. In pretty much every country, you can't own a home without having a mortgage. So it is one of life's necessities to have a home in order to raise a family. So in that, one of the things he was saying, it's a jima' it's a jima' or something. Where was it? Is by consensus, conventional mortgages are haram. So I just said I don't care about consensus. I'm afraid to say the truth is not by consensus nor by majority, right? So you say something like rejecting ijma' is itself misguidance, and I said rejecting ijma' is actually the very beginning of guidance, and that is true, right? To reject ijma' is where you can actually first start to actually find guidance, right? Because up to that point, you're just following the crowd, right? You're just saying what everybody else is saying, and unthinkingly. And I put in this, if anybody remembers Men in Black, you have this scene where, I forget his name, what's his name? Tommy Lee Jones, that's it. Where he says to Will, who says, hey, why don't you just tell everybody about the aliens? People are smart. He says, no, a person is smart, right? But people are dumb, panicky, let's say dangerous animals, and you know it, right? But the point is that, yes, even in the Quran, we have this verse here, which says, كَانَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً فَبَعَثَ اللَّهُ النَّبِيِّينَ مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ. It says all of mankind were like one ummah. What does that mean? It means they were united, right? They were united. All of mankind were like united. Okay, now of course it doesn't mean it's just talking about the different ummahs, right? So for example, the pagan Arabs of Arabia were like one ummah, and they were united in their misguidance, right? and the people of Ad were one ummah. They were united in their misguidance, right? The people were all around were united in misguidance. And so what did Allah do? He sent the the prophets, mubashirin and munzirin, giving good tidings and warners. Okay, and وَأَنزَلَ مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابِ بِالْحَقِّ, and He sent down with them the kitab, the prescriptions, so that they may judge between people, right? فِيمَا اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ, over that which they differ. So it's actually the messengers or prophets coming in which created a kind of disunity. Created disunity because when the truth comes in, it automatically splits people. People split between those who follow it and those who oppose it, right? So this idea that you sometimes see that unity is the most important thing. No, we should not be. Unity with misguidance is definitely not the best thing, right? So that's interesting to remember that yes, unity isn't the pinnacle thing, and that often rejecting the ijma, if there is some unity, is actually going to be the beginning of where you can start to gain some guidance. Charlie Kirk did this. He used God in a bad way. He said stupid Muslims. He called the Prophet Epstein with a standing army. I saw that. He was a lover Jew and a hater of Muslims. I mean, he was completely. He's of the mujrimeen and the product of mujrimeen, right? He's of the mujrimeen and a product of them, right? And because look, I mean, even what was that recent thing that video that came up of him where he's saying, was there a stand down order? And so his question, was there a stand down order? And he starts speaking about how, he's been in that he's been from Tel Aviv to the border of Gaza in a helicopter ride, which is 40 minutes or whatever, right? So he's saying that now. Okay, he was saying, well, not now, but he was saying that like just recently. Why wasn't he saying that for 2 years, right? Now he's starting to say, was there a standing order? Well, that means you kept that, right? You were hiding that truth, right? You were not giving that testimony during that whole time, right? And instead, you were doing the opposite, right? You were, and you weren't even following up with what that would mean. So if there was a stand down order, what does that actually mean, right? What does that mean? But that's an example of that, the example of Iran. Let me go back down to, where was the last thing that I actually replied to? So whenever this topic comes up about atheists going to Jannah, potentially, the issue is always that it's these translations. I mean, I had thought, to be honest, that the Muslims had advanced beyond the idea that kafir means disbeliever, right? But I need to remind myself that there's always people, new generation of people growing up, reading the translations for the first time, and if there isn't a constant, if there aren't people, influential people who are constantly reiterating that kafir doesn't mean disbeliever, right? At least even because when I was growing up, people understood this, right? People understood. They would say, kafir is somebody who knows the truth and rejects it, right? That's what they would say, right? The kafir knows what is the truth, but hides it, conceals it, covers it. Right? And that's definitely better than what is now. But if there are people who are, who are 8 years old, like 5 years ago, right, and now they're 13, and they decide to sort of like read the Qur'an, they just see disbeliever, right? And they think, okay, that's what we're talking about here, disbeliever. So that there needs to be, but who is there right now in the sort of like the English-speaking world, a popular speaker who people start, who will sort of like, put the idea into the environment that people actually that it spreads, right? When I was growing up, it was people like Hamza Yusuf, right? Would say, yeah, kafir. We're not talking about somebody who just doesn't believe, right? But it isn't. It isn't. Unfortunately, isn't the case now, right? Here's an example of one of the verses we've actually done in one of these live streams. So he puts in this verse, the example of those who disbelieve. Again, so he puts in disbelief in their Lord is that their deeds are like ashes which the wind blows forcefully, right? So he uses this to say, yeah, if you're a disbeliever, then all of your deeds will not matter. If you're an atheist, right? And I respond of that, it's exactly right. The verse does say that, but we are talking about atheists, not kuffar, right? We have to. This is the key issue, right? That's the thing that people aren't getting. And I said, what I've mentioned in one of the streams here on this channel before, that what's being described here, the similitude being given here in this verse, is about the deeds. It's not about them. It's about their deeds. That's what it literally says. The example of those who kafaru in their Lord, their deeds are like ashes. Their deeds are like ashes. So it's describing their deeds. It's a metaphor for their deeds, okay, which the wind blows forcefully on a stormy day, right? So that's not good deeds, right? When you've got a metaphor about deeds as ashes, that doesn't sound like good deeds to me, right? It sounds like basically weightless things, because the idea in the Quran is that good deeds have weight. Good deeds have weight, and bad deeds really don't have weight. I mean, we talk about it a lot that on Judgment Day that there'll be scales, right? Where the good deeds will be weighed against bad deeds. That's generally the image that we have. It's not exactly accurate though. The Quran just talks about a scale which is either heavy or light, right? It talks about a scale which is heavy or light. He whose scale is heavy will be saved. He whose scale is light will be damned. And the idea that generally comes to people's mind is that you're just looking at one side of the scale, but there's the other side of the scale that's being weighed against it. They've got the bad deeds on the other side, and when they are heavier, right, it means that the good deeds are light in comparison, right? Doesn't actually accurately say that. Really, it seems to be like one scale that your good deeds will be weighed against, because it will be sort of like the good deeds and the bad deeds will cancel each other, right? So what you're left with is a certain amount of good deeds, which will be light or heavy, right? So he whose good deeds are heavy, then they are saved, right? So anyway, the idea is that it seems in the Quran that the good deeds have weight on the Day of Judgment and bad deeds don't. One of the verses said, "La nuqimu lahum yawm al-qiyamati wazna." They will not, give them on the Day of Judgment any weight. They will not have any weight, right? So that's that's what I mentioned here, right? The verse is telling you about the deeds. That is an example to ponder on their deeds. Ashes easily blown even on a mild day, right? So the interesting thing about this verse is that ashes can be blown away on a mild day. It doesn't have to be a stormy day. So why is a stormy day mentioned, right? So anyway, again, it's always surprising that the Muslims still are talking about kufr as just disbelief. It's not alarm. Do we still have our guest here? No, not yet. Well, let's see one of these which I haven't actually answered to. Surely those who believe and do good deeds will have gardens under which rivers flow, and this is the greatest triumph. Yeah, I've got this lone guy, this lone supporter on my side here. Devil in Agbada, right? Like Agrabah, right? So I'd write here, I suppose this is a statement. It's a promise. It isn't giving a requirement. Requirements. Also, faith in the Quran just means Muslims. Just means Muslims, the followers of the Prophet Muhammad. It's a very interesting person, this person. I don't know what their religion is, but this was in the, if anybody saw this, it was this actually. So a new Islamic dilemma by this guy capturing Christianity. So if anybody's heard the Islamic dilemma, it's basically trying to say that the Quran is saying follow or judge by the Bible. And since the Bible tells us that Islam is false, it means Islam is false. And they say this is a dilemma. Anyway, this guy brought up a new version of it, which is really the same as the old version. Even where is he? There was a guy inspiring philosophy. One of those. That channel used to be very good. I remember inspiring philosophy when I was in university, doing a lot of videos about faith and about quantum mechanics and things like that. Now it's just one of those ones which is just basically trying to attack Muslims and refute Islam and all the rest of it. So anyway, in this Islamic dilemma, it's saying that the Quran tells the Prophet Muhammad he can resolve doubt about his revelations by consulting those reading the earlier scriptures. Okay, and part 2 is saying either the scriptures with them, then the Torah, prophets, gospels, etc., was sufficiently reliable for the role of resolving doubt, or it wasn't. And so, if it's reliable, the Quran contradictions with earlier scriptures count against the Quran on the Quran's own verification rule, etc. Right? So that's the idea. Again, it's the idea of trying to weaponize a verse of the Quran to say that it confirms earlier scriptures, and then using that to say that Islam is false and all the rest of it. I did put my own reply in that somewhere. Where was it? So yeah, I had actually a thread which I wrote about that. But the basic idea is this: the key point is that the Prophet Muhammad could also ask the Jews, right, about Jesus and Christianity, because it's saying ask those before, right, those who recite the scripture before you, right. If you are in doubt, ask them. In which case, if that includes the Jews, right? So if the Prophet were to ask the Jews about Christianity, about Jesus, what would they say? Of course, they don't say that he was they don't even say he was a prophet, right? They reject the Trinity, that he was born of a virgin, that he rose from the dead, etc., that he's God's son. All of that, they reject that. So this dilemma actually works against these Christian apologists if they want to put it in those kind of way. But of course, the idea behind that verse, the actual idea behind this verse, is the Prophet is meant to ask questions, and we can as well ask the questions which will help him resolve his doubts. Right? It isn't a blank check. That would mean that now they can tell the Prophet whatever he wants. No, he's the one who's going to be asking the questions. Right? You ask the questions. And so if you put yourself in that position, if you had doubt in the Quran and you wanted to ask questions of the earlier scriptures, the people who studied and are sincere about studying the earlier scriptures, what questions would you ask? Right? What questions would you ask to alleviate doubt? One of them would be regarding the stories. So, the Prophet Muhammad was in Mecca. He was not exposed, despite what people say, to much of these stories. The Quran says that, right? For example, like the story of Noah, says, he says that you didn't know this, neither you nor your people. أنت ولا قومك من قبل هذا. You nor your people knew about this before this revelation, right? So nobody knew this. None of the Arabs of Hijaz, of Mecca, knew about the story of Noah. So if he was going to confirm, to try to get, if he had any doubts and he wanted to confirm something of the Quran, he would then go to those who read the scripture before. Then they would tell him the story of Noah. And they would say, yes, it matches what I received, right? And then that would help alleviate the doubt. So, in the end, there's a lot of power in what questions you ask, right? And that is the idea here, that the Prophet himself would ask the questions which help alleviate his doubt, right? And it will probably be questions about which all of the people of the book would agree, right? You'd ask questions that of which Jews and Christians would be in agreement with, things that would then confirm what you have, to see that it all comes from the same source. So there's the idea. And this guy who was replying to me here, I don't know, he just went on about how because somebody there was another Muslim response. This guy, Ustad Ijaz, he made this, I think it's a blunder. I'm trying to explain it away as a rhetorical question. It isn't rhetorical, right? So when the verse says, "Oh, if you prophet are in doubt about these," well, this even this translation has these stories, but of course that's in brackets. It's in part of the actual verse. If you, O prophet, are in doubt about that which we have revealed to you, مَا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ, then ask those who read the scripture before you, right? He's trying to say that's a rhetorical question. It's obviously not a rhetorical request, because the next part of the verse says, the truth has certainly come to you from your Lord, so do not be of those who doubt, right? Do not be of those who doubt. That doesn't mean that it's rhetorical, right? When you tell somebody, don't be of those who doubt, yes, that can help alleviate your doubt. That doesn't change the previous one about if you do have doubt, right? What you should do, right? If you do have doubt, do this, but don't doubt. That's what the verse is saying. Don't doubt. And it's you could also take it as saying that if you have doubt, then do this, and then you will see that the truth has certainly come to you from your Lord. So then, after you've done that, do not be of those who doubt, right? So this is a procedure given to him to alleviate his doubt, and then afterwards, he shouldn't have any doubt. So then, do not be of those who doubt. So to take away your doubt, do that. So, this idea that it's a rhetorical question is not right. So this guy jumped in and said, yes, these people, these Dawah people are doing this because they're all liars and people are leaving Islam in droves and blah blah blah. I don't know what he was going on about. And then he was saying that the core of Islam is the apostasy law, right? The main thing about Islam is to kill you if you leave it, if you try to leave it. Okay, let's see what else do we have here. I don't want to jump into that. No, that. Okay, this seems like this was a pretty nuanced one. There are two sides to this debate. He says, one is that God has given everyone reason, so they must use their reason and can reach the truth, so therefore they will be punished. Another is reason alone is not sufficient. All men are not equal in reason, therefore God sends revelation to guide. And those who did not get properly introduced to revelation will not be punished. But if someone still rejects the truth, even when revelation is clear cut to them, they are dogmatic. The punishment is most likely hell. These are tricky questions. I mean, morality throughout human history has been so different, and people have throughout history genuinely believed they are doing like child sacrifice was considered good, but the Quran is clearly against it. That's sort of like one of the somebody was asking if we could discuss moral dilemmas. Well, I mean, this is an example of that, right? He's saying that that's a moral dilemma, that people didn't have the morality to know that that child sacrifice was wrong, and they thought it was good. No. See, that's where I stoutly reject that, right? Everybody knows, every human being knows child sacrifice is not okay, right? What leads people to do it is exactly that shirk, right? When we talk about shirk ibadah to the priests and the leaders and the thing, that is shirk, okay? That is shirk. That's what's causing that, right? We have that in the Quran as well, right? زُيِنَ لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ قَتْلَ أَوْلَادِهِمْ شُرَكَاؤُهُم, that made fair pleasing to the mushrikeen was by their shuraka, by the objects of their shirk, by their idols, was the killing of their own children, right? So it isn't that people thought it was good; it's they were being deceived by their shirk. It's their shirk which is the issue here, right? So the basic morality, things like theft being wrong, murder being wrong, oppressing people, despoiling orphans, these sort of things are known globally by fitrah, right? And you will always be judged according to them. And there's no excuse to saying I didn't know. No, you know, right? فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورُهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. The human soul has been given ilham to know that it's fujur from its taqwa. Just check to see if there's any. Guys, here. My meeting finished. Glad you are still here. All right. Oh, there you are. You're backstage. Let me add you now. Hello. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Nice to meet you.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, you too. How are you doing?
I'm really good, man. It's been a good Sunday.
Excellent.
I've been watching you for a good minute now. I really enjoy your content, and I had a few questions that I wanted to ask on Reddit, but you were very busy over the past few months. I was wondering if I could ask you them here, because this is the first time I was able to catch a stream.
Yeah. Go ahead. I actually need to try to get back into the groove with Reddit, but I haven't been able to do that, to be honest. I keep saying yes, I need to get back. I've got like a lot of pending chats, pending replies, pending a lot of things, but I haven't been able, because I took a break from it and it sort of like piled up. And also, to be honest, it's just been very the whole thing what's happening in Gaza and just that sort of takes up a lot of attention, which I suppose maybe you shouldn't. I should unplug from that a bit, but How can you? You can't look away from that. You have to sort of like keep abreast of it, I suppose. I don't know. But yes, anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Wow, it's a lot I haven't written down. So the first thing, I guess I was talking to someone on Twitter. Yeah, I do remember. I was talking to someone on Twitter, and it was about whether God would make something haram that he earlier said was halal, and like because not like because I was thinking about it like different from like the what was in the Quran about like Jesus making something that was haram halal as like lifting a punishment or imposing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about like I guess God's morality changing or something. Um,
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Yeah, in that in that level, when you talk about God's morality changing, no, right? But yes, when it comes to actual just Sharia, some Sharia rulings, right? So yes, there might be some things which are made haram and halal, right? Like the example you said, right? That in Bani Israel, there were some things that were made haram for them as a punishment, right? It wasn't as because the actual thing itself was bad or not good, right? So even the verse says, right, that and to make things and to make good things, طيبات, things that were good, um, um, that were good things that were to make good things that were made haram for you halal, right? So Isa was reversed that, right? But the good things were always good, right? And they're being made haram was just a punishment. Now in our Sharia, right, even in the Quran mentions that the Prophet was to make only the tayyib halal, right, and the haram and the khabith haram, and that's it, right? So in our one, the sort of like to put in what you said before, like the morality matches up um, with the haram and halal completely. There's nothing which is halal, sort of like, let's say, as a, I don't know, as a test or something, right? Like you're allowed to do it, but you shouldn't, or something like that. No, and there's nothing which is haram as a punishment, right? That then and I now Sharia, the things which are tayyib, which are good, are halal, and the things which are khabith are haram, and nothing else is haram apart from the khabith, and nothing else is labeled as halal apart from the tayyib, right? And in between that, there's other things, because some people, yeah, they have this idea that anything which is not haram is halal, right? But that's not accurate, right? So God tells us things which are halal and things which are haram, and the rest of the things, right? They're not part of that category. They're not part of those categories of halal and haram. Those categories are for Allah alone. He says something is haram and halal, and that's it. Beyond that, we don't call other things halal or haram. So the Quran in one verse says, لا تقول لما تصف ألسنتكم الكذب هذا حلال وهذا حرام. Do not say according to that thing by which your tongue then makes a lie. This is halal and this is haram. And you're not allowed to say something is halal and something is haram, right? You leave those categories for Allah.
I have a question about that a bit later, but
Okay.
to continue on this, the thing that we were arguing a little bit about was like the topic of alcohol, because everyone knows, like, while the Quran doesn't like say haram for this, we know alcohol is haram. But you said that alcohol being haram is like an example of this haram turning halal, because in heaven there's alcohol. But I was saying, like, the problem with alcohol here versus in heaven is not a problem of it being haram here and halal in heaven. The problem is like he was trying to say it was like the fact that you get intoxicated. But I said the thing about alcohol being haram here and halal in heaven is because, as the Quran says, we can't drink alcohol because it's the tool of shaitan. And when it's in heaven, when we have the rivers of wine or whatever, shaitan's not in heaven. You can't use it as a tool. So like that's the reason. Wine itself isn't haram. It's just the fact its effects because of shaitan are.
Yeah. There's that, but of course, also, we're not going to be able to compare the wine that will be in heaven to here. I don't think it's going to be something which is going to sort of intoxicate you, right? And if it does, maybe it will intoxicate you in a good way, like Irish get very happy when they're drunk or something.
Because you were also saying, I was telling you, it's heavy. If you want to be drunk, you can be drunk. There's no Satan to make you do bad things when you're drunk. Because
Yeah. I see what you mean.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you can see it that way. Yeah, in heaven, if you want to be drunk, you can be drunk, and no ill will come of it, right?
hmm
Yeah. I see what you mean.
The other question, well, you already answered this on the live stream like a month ago about what the word that's usually translated as fully detailed is, so I don't need to ask about that.
Okay, yeah.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you, what's the difference between dua min dunillah and dua ma'allah? Because like only one of them is like you go to hell if you don't repent, and I barely even know the difference.
Yeah, so dua min dunillah means just dua to other than Allah, right? So Allah's not in the picture, right? So invoking other than Allah, right? Um, and of course, even dua, right? So there's the dua where you can say, calling on somebody like, like prayers, right? And more often in the Quran, that what dua has been used as is invoking, like to invoke the law, right? When we say, I'm going to invoke the law, we're not saying we're going to call upon the law, right? You're saying we're going to bring sort of the law into the equation, into the attendance, right? In the same way, you have people who invoke a sheikh or invoke a scholar, right, to make their point, right? So they will invoke other than Allah, right, for an issue, right? So they might, the Quran might be there and very clear on a topic, but they will invoke other than Allah, right,
Do you have an
to
example?
for that issue. So let's say, yeah, I mean, the most obvious one is, of course, like the apostasy law, right? Right, or the idea that you can marry prepubescent girls, right? So you have these, which are mentioned in the Quran, right? And nisa, that the Quran says, marry women, and somebody will invoke other than Allah, right? To say no, there's this narration which says X or so, or this scholar said this, or that person said this, right? So you're invoking other than Allah for something, okay?
Okay, so
As an authority. Yeah, it's like invoking another authority, right?
okay.
Like invoking somebody else other than Allah.
So that's min dunillah and
That's
ma'allah.
min dunillah. Yeah. So,
Ma'allah is the worst one. What's an example of that? Because I was thinking the example you just gave was the worst one.
well, no, I mean, it's not that I don't know if I mean, I haven't really thought about in terms of which one is worse, du'a ma Allah or du'a min dunillah,
I
right?
only say the second one is the worst one because that's the one where you get threatened with hellfire if you don't repent.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about ومن يدعو which verse are you talking? ومن يدعو من دون الله ما because there's another one which you do get threatened when it's dua مع Allah, there is a threat for hell for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I haven't seen a threat of hell from min dunillah.
Okay, I see what you mean. I need to have actually look at that. I'm not sure about the threats of hell for one or the other. But when يدعو مع الله إلها آخر, you've got لا برهان له به, right? So in that one, you even have this idea of you have no evidence for that. Okay, then his hisab is with Allah, right? So whoever calls with Allah another ilah with him, right? Which he has no evidence for, right? Then his hisab will be with Allah. And the idea behind that again is you're saying that this other thing is an ilah with Allah, and you're going to call upon it with Allah. So you call on upon Allah and you call upon Him, right? On this other ilah together, right? And the issue of that, of course, is that this other ilah could be command you to anything else, right? It's another ilah ma'allah, which is the falsehood as well, right? I mean that there is no other ilah other than Allah, right? So when you call upon somebody else and you say there's another ilah with Allah, and with Allah, and you know that Allah has said no other aliha but Him, right? Where does that leave you, right? Where does that leave you? You have like multiple aliha that you call upon, right, together with Allah.
So let me see if I can. Let me see if I'm understanding the difference correctly. I'm gonna try and put it into my own words. So min Allah is when like you invoke Allah or like someone else, like sort of to not combat, but yeah, combat or go against what Allah says. Like
Yeah,
as you said, apostasy laws, like just to substitute something Allah says, like to say like it's
yeah,
okay in this situation, but like
yeah,
yeah. But when you say
yeah,
it's sort of like it's giving the vibe that you're putting that person, you're raising them up to supersede Allah. Like you know what Allah says and you're superseding that. With the other one is like you just feel like this is just like a sub rule, but the other one is like this is a rule that overwrites what Allah says.
yeah, yeah. It's like having them both together. Like for example, you know, it can be a problem or not a problem when you're talking about ma'allah, right? So if you've taken somebody as an ilah with Allah, and that person is commanding what Allah commands, right? There's an issue of that in that you've taken the person as an ilah, which is wrong, right? But the actual the what leads what the net result from that is not going to be something bad, right? If the person is commanding what Allah commands, right, is saying what Allah says, right? There's not going to be like that sort of like evil consequence with it, right? Doesn't That's not necessarily true, right?
Like doing a good deed is not mentioned in the Quran, like raising money for like I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, but that's the. I mean, when we talk about the other thing to keep in mind is what ilah is, right?
Yeah, I
So
wanted to ask
ilah is
what's your
yeah,
depth of that because I think it's more complex than just a deity.
yeah. So an ilah is somebody who actually something which you venerate, right? You have this veneration. You've put it above you, right? As something above you that you will bow to it, that you will sort of like put yourself low before it, right? It can be a person or inanimate object, right? So, for example, the Israelites took the golden calf as an ilah, right? It was just an inanimate object, but they took it as an ilah, right? And they would like bow to it, prostrate to it, or basically be humble themselves before it, right? And ilah is something when you say put somebody up on a pedestal, right? Put someone or something on a pedestal. You're putting it above yourself, okay? You're putting it up above that kind of like divine status where you just venerate it, and you've put it in this lofty position above you. Okay, that is what an ilah will be. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's going to be allowed. So somebody might um, um, take the words of this person or this person, right? But they don't really consider them like an ilah, right? But other times they will actually venerate this person very very highly, right? They'll put this, and whatever this person says goes, right? I will follow whatever he says, right? Like I remember that guy, that famous scholar in in Saudi, right? Which is, I mean, he was saying this out of fear, probably more than anything else, right? But he was a fanatic for years and years. He was telling people to go, fight jihad in Syria. He ended up causing a lot of people to go out and become extremists and fanatics and go, try to like blow themselves up here or wherever, right? So he was doing it for years, and people would argue against him, bring him evidence that this is wrong, etc. Try to just deal with his extremism, and of course he just doesn't listen, right? Doesn't budge. He just continues on that. And then when MBS became the ruler of Saudi, and then he himself decided that all of this stuff was extremism, and it wasn't allowed, and that we want to get rid of it, and it was a mistake that Saudi went down this path. The very next day, like the guy was on TV talking about how he's repented. I repent. I'm not going to do this anymore. All of this was a mistake. This whole extremism was a mistake. And he literally says, I'm declaring my repentance, and I swear that I'm on the religion of MBS. That's literally he said that. أنا على دين محمد بن Salman. I'm on the religion of Muhammad bin Salman. Okay, so that's the kind of thing. That's like taking somebody as an ilah, right? What's my deen? My deen is this person here, right? Right. Now, of course, this is he might not actually be doing that because it's more like doing that of fear, right, than anything else, right? That's not the same, right? For somebody who takes something as ilah, he's doing it almost he's voluntarily, right? He's putting somebody like that in that sort of position voluntarily, right? And you have people like this who have this kind of fanatical view of sheikhs and imams and stuff that whatever he says goes, right? Whatever he says is the deen, that's the deen, right? Now that is where you get to this issue.
So I had two other questions and then something I want to like, some essays that I actually made. I wanted your opinions on. So I'll just do this first. This one's a little bit more complex, but like, what are your thoughts on like? So I'll go into this one first. What are your thoughts on like the problem of suffering, like the things that we can't like control, like let's say brain cancer or something that we can't like. It's not something we can like go out and catch. It's just brain cancer. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's just basically natural processes, right? So I don't believe in this idea that that everything that sort of like happens in this kind of way is sort of just decreed upon you, right? So like, let's say somebody gets brain cancer, and it's going to happen even because of where he's been, what he's eaten, exposure to radiation, these sort of things, right? That are in the end going to happen. Now, could it be that this is something which is Allah has actually made as a test for the person, that it's actually intervening in that, angels sent down to give him brain cancer or something, right? Could be. It could be that, right? But in terms of just the total view of suffering, okay, why do we suffer for this or for that or the other, right? Most of it is either because of ourselves, what we've actually done. I'm talking just like what you've done, like you go to some tropical area, and you catch some disease, right? And then you say, oh, this suffering is from Allah. Well, no, I mean, you decided to go to this tropical area, right? Without, getting vaccinated or whatever, or this or that, right? And, sleep outside with mosquitoes, and then you get malaria or you get, yellow fever or something.
I guess
no,
that would be like that most like atheists would ask is like, why would God even make those bacteria for that?
Why would God make those bacteria? Well, it's part of the natural world that He made, right? So this world is meant to have these things because it is a theater of testing, right? So these things happening in it, right? I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, let's say just that very premise, right? That God created these things happening in the world. There's natural processes, right? And so when something happens to you, are you now going to blame God? Right, that's part of it, right? If you're being tested in that sort of way, you're going to say, okay, now I'm going to blame God for this natural process, or I'm going to blame God for the drunk driver who hit me, right, or who killed my wife or kids, right? So it's part of the world, right? These are things are part of the world. This world is meant to be, it is short, and you're meant to be tested on it fully. So that there's no. The idea that this is meant to be like a utopia where you don't have these things, where nobody gets sick, where nobody when nothing bad happens to you, and no, it isn't meant to be like that, right? It's meant to be right, to test which of you is going to be best indeed, who's going to be patient, who's going to be this, that, and the other, right? So somebody in one position will be sitting there and questioning and saying, oh, angry at God. Why did God do this to me? Right? And another person would be completely at peace with it, right? And would say, this is part of life, and I will be patient, right? And who will have the higher position of Allah? The person who is taking this as something which is, an opportunity to show patience, right? So doesn't get angry. That doesn't like say, let these kind of whisperings and sort of like anger at God take over, right?
That makes sense. That makes sense. And my other question was about how how free will in the future works, because the way I've thought about it, well, I haven't really thought about it. I've just had some rough thoughts about people asking me about God's foreknowledge, and all I've
Mm,
really been able to think about was does the future even exist at all? I know God
mm,
said things about, oh, these people will go to heaven, oh, these people will go to hell, but I've really thought about
mm,
that for a good minute, and it's that's really not even telling the future. That's just cause and effect. That's if my parent says, if you do the dishes, I'll give you the people. My children who do the dishes, I'll give them candy. This, and that.
mm.
I was
Yeah.
really thinking, does not does God have foreknowledge, but how does that even work?
How does it work with in terms of like predestination, that kind of stuff? You mean, right?
Yeah, because I don't really believe in predestination that much. The most I believe in is just a giant web of if then statements. But not really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in predestination at all, right? So there are certain things where which God sort of has planned to happen, right? Like certain messengers coming forth, and and these were from promises, like Ibrahim asking that some a messenger be sent from his descendants, these sort of things, right? So God intervenes in this world, in these sort of things, like with messengers, with prophets, and other times, very subtly, right? But in terms of like the whole idea of predestination and foreknowledge, I like to think of it. In the end, people often just mix up the two, right? So predestination or preordainment and um, and foreknowledge, they're not the same thing. So knowing that something is going to happen doesn't cause the thing to happen, right? It's not.
Mhm.
It's not. It doesn't make it happen. Think of it. I used to give this example that, like now, for example, let's say the movie The Matrix, right? So the script of the script of The Matrix. You know how it goes. Um, who's going to be the actor and all the rest of it, right? So you have that knowledge, right? If you were, transported back in time and put in like some remote desert island, right? 10 years before the film was made, does your knowing that it's going to be that Keanu Reeves is going to play it rather than Will Smith, who was apparently offered it, does you knowing that that the main actor is going to be Keanu Reeves rather than Will Smith, does that cause it to happen?
No, and I also feel even that's a
No.
little bit different, because we really don't even understand how God sees time, because He exists
Yeah,
outside.
exactly. Exactly. So God isn't even within time, right? So everything that's happened and is happening and will happen is all just one thing for God. Again, we can't even comprehend that, or even say really that it is like one thing for God. But um, he's outside time, right? So, but the main idea is that our free will is total, right? It's total. That God knowing what we'll do does not make us do it, right? He knows what we're going to do because we choose it, because He knows what we will choose, right? So that you just have to separate the idea of knowing something just doesn't cause it. Knowledge doesn't cause something to happen. Knowing that something is going to happen doesn't make it happen, right? That doesn't make it that way. They have to actually have a cause and effect um, in making something happen.
Mm. And what else was I gonna ask? There was something else I did want to ask. Maybe it'll come back to me. But the
Yeah.
thing I wrote, I actually was really excited to share these to you. I wrote these over the summer. I've been
All right.
doing some studies about the Quran and the Bible, and it was something I was gonna post on Reddit, but I was I don't know. It was this series that I titled the Quran and the Bible, and I had one, two, three, six, yes, six little posts that I was gonna make. The first one was, "What is Al Kitab and who are Ahlul, the people of the book?" Um,
Hmm.
the second one was, "The Bible, is it corrupted or not?" The third one is, "What is the Torah?" The fourth one is, "The historical Jesus and the Gospel." The fifth one is,
Mm.
the Qur'anic Jesus, and the Christians. And the last one was who was Paul. And the ones I've finished so far, well, I wouldn't say the first one is finished, the one about what is Al-Kitab, because I feel like I still want to do some more work on that. But that one is fleshed out. The Bible one, I wanted to talk to you about. And the Torah, that's the one that's fully finished. I wanted to get your thoughts on. So I'll do the Torah one first.
All right, cool.
So I'm just going to read it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Contrary to popular belief, the Torah was not the book given to Moses. When you look in the Quran, you'll be very surprised to find out the two are never, ever connected or related. Not once are they even in the same sentence or verse. Truly, if this Torah was the same thing as what we refer to as the Torah today, the first 5 books of the Bible, God would have connected it to the prophet it's traditionally attributed to, correct? That caused me to think, why didn't he? So I looked into it. The word Torah quite literally just means law. So when I read the verses of the Quran containing it, I detached it from the first 5 books of the Bible and just replaced it in my mind with the law. Now, a majority of the verses containing the word Torah are actually about Jesus. But the verse that stuck out to me was 544. Indeed, we sent down the Torah, in which was a guidance and a light. The prophets who submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews, as did the rabbis and scholars by that which they were entrusted of the scripture of Allah. They were witnesses thereto. So do not fear the people, but fear me, and do not exchange my verses for a small price. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is they who are kafiruna. So this verse popped out to me because they identified the people who judge by the Torah. The prophets did it for the Jews. The prophets judged by the Torah, and the rabbis judged by Al-Kitab. Now, a little bit of history. The Jews weren't really identified as the Jews until they became the two kingdoms. The Jewish kingdom, which was in southern Palestine, and the northern kingdom, which was the kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom was Judah, where we get the term Jew from, which was closer to Babylon. Now, what's interesting is that the Quran doesn't mention any of the prophets of the land of Judah before the Babylonian exile, as in Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel. There are only 3 prophets in the Quran from the post-exile period from the southern kingdom of Judah, which are Zechariah, John, and Jesus. And that's obviously from a way later time after that kingdom was already taken down.
Yeah, but at the time that was after, right, the disintegration of the state. Yes.
After the Babylonians came and sacked it, there were no more kings in Judah. The rest of the prophets sent to the kingdom of Israel were from the kingdom of Israel, the northern nation, according to the Bible. Elijah, Elisha, Jonah, those are all prophets traditionally who came from the northern kingdom, not the kingdom where the Jews were, the Israelites, not the Jews.
Okay.
The prophets from Israel aren't connected with the Torah either at all. The Torah is only said to be sent down to the unnamed prophets of the Jews and Jesus. And a side note that I had was some do believe that Rukifu is Ezekiel, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure how they would identify him with that. And even inferring Al-Yasa to be Elisha might be a stretch to some people. I don't know. Now let's look to 2 other Quranic verses that resonated with me on the topic of the Torah that felt very important. So I quoted 350, and I have come confirming what came before me of the Torah, and to make lawful for you some of what was forbidden to you. And I have come to you with a sign from your Lord. So fear Allah and obey me. And 546, and we sent in their footsteps Jesus, the son of Mary, confirming that which came before him of the Torah, and we gave him the gospel, in which was guidance and light, and confirming that which preceded it of the Torah as guidance and instruction for the righteous. These 2 verses about Jesus, notice how God words them. What was before me of the Torah, that which came before him of the Torah. Why didn't God just say the Torah? It seems to me that Jesus completed the Torah, which wasn't finished by his time. As he said on the Sermon of the Mount in the book of Matthew, I did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill it. This helped me come to the conclusion that the Torah was a multitude of laws given to multiple Jewish prophets, which continued to be amended and restated. It's not a book, and the Quran never calls it a book or a kitab or a zabur. Now, what were the laws and messages of these prophets? When we look at the major prophets of Judah, like the ones I mentioned before, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, um, their message was directly in line with the Quran, with what the Quran says. Messengers were sent for the ayat, kitab, and mizana in 57:25, establishing justice among the socially unjust and immoral. Look at this passage inside
Yeah.
Isaiah 1.
Your voice is a bit far away right now. Can you?
Oh, what was the last part you heard?
You were talking about the prophets Ezekiel.
Okay, so I said when you look at the books of these prophets in the Bible, their messages were all talking about the same things that the Quran says that the messenger were supposed to be sent for, to bring justice among a socially unjust and immoral people. And when you look in some of these books, like a passage in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 3 and 4, it says, excuse me, the ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib. But Israel does not know. My people do not understand. A sinful nation, people laden with iniquity, offspring who do evil, children who deal corruptly, who have forsaken their Lord, who have despised the Holy One of Israel, who are utterly estranged. The entire rest of the chapter is chastising the Jews for once being righteous and turning to evil. The message of the entire book of Isaiah was a call to turn from evil and to repent before God brings His justice upon them. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. That's Isaiah chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. That's literally stuff that's talked about in the Quran. And these Jewish prophets, the only difference is that these Jewish prophets thought that God's justice and punishment would come on earth like eminently and not like in a future cosmic day of judgment. They thought that they thought the day of judgment would come like how like the past cities were wiped out. They thought that they would be wiped out during their lifetime. The secondary message in Isaiah is the emphasis on how God does not care about the rituals of people who do no righteousness. Repentance and change are worth a million times more than sacrifices to God in Isaiah. Their offerings are futile and an abomination to God. The Jews are proven to be a fruitless people, as shown in the next passage, chapter 5, verses 5 to 7. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but he heard a cry. This same message rings throughout the books of Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and all the other prophets in the southern kingdom of Judah. But most importantly, Jesus, whom we will talk about in the next post. Do I think the books ascribed to these prophets are the actual Torah? Not exactly. I think the spirit of the messages in these books, the urges to stop being immoral and unjust within these writings, are part of the Torah, likely coming from the actual Jewish prophets. But I don't know historically if these entire books are entirely from said prophets, and most likely they aren't. But something very important to note historically is that the Pentateuch only began being, the first 5 books of the Bible only began being written under the rule of King Josiah. For reference, this is after Isaiah would have lived around like 600 BC, not the time of when Moses hypothetically would have existed, and during the last of the prophets of Judah, making it clear that the Pentateuch isn't the scripture given to Moses, it's only laws connected to a legend attributed to Moses. And that's the post about the Torah.
Okay, that's really interesting. That that's the first time I've ever thought of this idea of the Jews being basically the I don't even say it, don't even sort of say Israelites anymore. The Israelites of the southern kingdom, right? And just and so he's saying that the Torah is linked to them rather than to the Israelites of the northern kingdom.
Not the Israelites of the northern kingdom, and not even the Israelites of like before the kingdom split, because the kingdom split after Solomon. Before that, everyone was just, after they split, it was the Israelites and the Jews.
Yeah, before they were split, what were they called?
They were just Israelites from Moses down
Just
to
Israelites.
yeah.
Yeah, and then afterwards the southern were called the Jews. And so you're saying that the Torah is mostly basically the law that's related to them, from the southern kingdom, right?
Precisely. Because when you look
Yeah.
at, if you look at like I looked up which prophets of the Bible who are also in the Quran, where they were from. Prophets that are from the northern kingdom, those were Elijah, Elisha, and Jonah.
Yunus. Yeah, and Jonas. Yeah, Yunus.
They're never connected to the Jews. They're only said to have went to the children of Israel.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the other prophets, the ones who are like in the kingdom of Judah, they're not mentioned at all in the Quran, unless you count like Jesus, John, and Zechariah, which I won't count because that's after the kingdoms have fallen. They're just in like the historical areas where Judah was from, the southern area.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. That's fascinating, actually. Yeah. That's
And then,
really good. Really good. Yeah.
thank you. Is there anything like you would like think about with this that I should maybe add or think about before I post it?
No. To be honest, because to be honest, I mean, I don't study the Bible and the biblical stuff very much, so there's not much I could add to it. But I think that is actually a very good insight. Something that's worth investigating further, right, and checking out on that. But yeah, definitely when it comes to the Torah, it is. I mean, other than the idea, yes, many have mentioned it before that the Torah just means the law, right? And that it's not related to Musa in the Quran at all. That's something that's been noted quite a bit. But other than that, there's nothing else which I would have actually come up with in any of that.
So I also wanted to share with you what I have so far about the post about Al-Kitab.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I said when the Quran is oh wait, I skipped the whole paragraph. To know who the people of the book are, we should first know what Al-Kitab is in the Quran. When most people think of the term Al-Kitab, they translate it in their head as the book, which to them obviously refers to the Quran. That's why when many people try to refute Qur'anists, they refer to the verses that say the messenger came to teach the people Al-Kitab and Al-Hikmah, presuming that Al-Kitab is the Quran and Al-Hikmah is the Sunnah, the Hadith. This couldn't be further from the truth. Neither of these terms are the Quran, and neither of these terms are the Hikmah. Both Al-Kitab and Al-Hikmah are included in the Quran. And that brings us to our main point. What actually is Al-Kitab? When the Quran is referred to with the term Kitab, it isn't called the Kitab for the most part. It's actually either called a Kitab or Al, insert adjective. It's never just called Al-Kitab. It usually has like a modifier on it. Like,
Say that again, that last part.
It's never, the Quran, from what I've seen, is never called Al-Kitab by itself. It's called Al-Kitab with an adjective connected to it.
Okay, yeah.
So I looked for some verses, and I saw usually it's usually after the Alif Lam Ra verses. It says a kitab whose ayat da, da, da. These are the ayat of the wise kitab. These are the ayat of the clear kitab, or a kitab which we have revealed to you, da, da, da. Or a consistent kitab. That's how the Quran calls itself, a kitab or the kitab. It never just says al kitab.
Yeah.
So I said, notice how in the following Alif Lam Ra verses, how it separates the generic Al-Kitab from a Quran. In 15:1 it says Alif Lam Ra. These are the ayat of the Kitab in a clear Quran. So that separated Al-Kitab from the Quran. Is the verses of Al-Kitab and the verses of a clear Quran.
Yeah.
So if Al-Kitab and the Quran are two distinct books, how do we know what Al-Kitab is? Well, if you look in the verse below, we will get to a hint of what Al-Kitab may mean within the Quran. So Sahih International, I just read the translation. 98:2-3. A messenger from Allah reciting purified scriptures which are correct kutubun. I hope I said that right.
كتب القيمة. Yeah.
Obviously, verse 2 is referring to when Muhammad was reciting the Quran, but within the Quran are correct books. The Quran doesn't have books like the Bible. So from here, we can start to infer that the word kitab in the Quran may not really be the word book per se. Let's look at some more verses. So I categorize these verses into different things. So the first heading is Al-Kitab is a tool for justice. So I had chapter 2, verse 213, where it says, Al-Kitab, then Allah sent the prophets as a bringer of good tidings and warners, and sent down with them Al-Kitab in truth to judge between the people concerning that in which they differed. Then I had chapter 4, verse 105, where it says, Indeed, we revealed to you, O Muhammad, Al-Kitab in truth, so that you may judge between the people by which Allah has shown you. And then I had chapter 42, verse 15. It says, so that the religion of Allah, I don't know why I had that in brackets. I have believed in what Allah has revealed min kitabin, and I have been commanded to do justice among you. So those verses show that Al-Kitab is a tool for justice. Then the next heading says Al-Kitab is used to instruct, ordain, and prescribe. It's a lot of verses in here, and I don't feel like reading them all because I stutter over my words. But
It's fine. It's fine.
those
No,
verses
just like a couple.
Okay, so I had verse 231. He said, and remember the favor of Allah upon you and what has been revealed to you of Al-Kitab and wisdom by which He instructs you. So that shows that Al-Kitab is used for instruction. Chapter 4, verse 127 says, and they request from you, O Muhammad, a ruling concerning women. Say, Allah gives you a ruling about them and about what has been revealed to you in Al-Kitab concerning the orphan girls to whom you do not give what is kutub for them, and da. So that shows that it's description. And then the third verse I'll say is 548. So judge between them by what Allah has revealed, i.e. Al-Kitab, and do not follow the inclinations away from what has come to you of the truth. And then my next heading, the last heading, is Al-Kitab is here to clarify confusion. This one only had 3 verses, so I'll just say them. So 323 says, do not consider, O Muhammad, those who were given a portion of Al-Kitab. They are invited to Al-Kitab of Allah. They should arbitrate between them. Then a party of them turns away, and they are refusing. 548 says, and we have revealed to you, O Muhammad, Al-Kitab in truth, confirming that which preceded of it, of Al-Kitab, and as a criterion over it. And 1664 says, and we have not revealed to you Al-Kitab, O Muhammad, except for you to make clear to them that wherein they differ, and as guidance and mercy for a people who believe. And mention the day when we will resurrect among every nation a witness over them from themselves, and we will bring you, O Muhammad, as a witness over your nation. And we have sent down to you Al-Kitab as a clarification for all things, and as a guidance and a mercy and a good tidings for the Muslims. That's 1689. And and these are just the relevant noun usage. When we look at the verb usages, we see things like fasting, regular prayer, writing a will, proper fighting, hudud punishments, and whatnot. Those are all used. Those are all using the verb tense of kitab to say prescribe. Now, from the way it's described, we can clearly see al-kitab, the purpose of al-kitab for God. Al-kitab is God's way of directing us how to live, a mercy and a light to the straight path, meant to lead us to our highest Quranic goal of establishing justice with taqwa. More fitting words to use when we refer to al-kitab rather than the book would be things such as the law, the ruling, the prescriptions, or the one I see the most fitting, the decree of God. Now, with that being said, who are the people of the book? Simply anybody who has received divine prescriptions from God that lead to taqwa and justice. In no verses does God say that the messengers were sent al-kitab to establish tawheed. This is not limited to Christians and Jews. The Quran only talks about these two because they were the only major religious groups around the Prophet. Zoroastrians can also be included. Buddhists might even be included. Even Ifa in Nigeria could be included. etc. The people of the book, I have trouble pronouncing that word. The people of the book does not mean the people of the Bible. However, the Bible does contain al-kitab, but that's a topic for a different part of this series. Tell me what you think, guys. To disagree with me, let's have a good discussion.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with the idea that kitab means prescriptions. I've typically translated it that way. The prescriptions, the rulings. Some verses which you might want to add. I don't know if you have them there, but like the verses which talk about prescribed for you, right? So like fasting, kutiba alaykum as-siyam, right?
I mentioned those, but I didn't say I didn't.
Yeah, you didn't read them out. Okay, yeah. But those exactly tell you what we're talking about. We're talking about kitab, and it's like that prescription. Just like when you go to a doctor and he writes a prescription for you, he writes a prescription, right? So that's the kind of kitab we're talking about here, really. If you've seen Dr. Khalil Adnani, if you know that guy, it's Ismaili guy, but he works in academia in Islamic studies, right? And he has a lot to say about what kitab means as well. For him, it means sort of like more like he calls it the divine right or something, if I remember, divine writ. So it's more something which is
I'm
more
pretty sure that's what
ephemeral.
Muhammad Assad says too. He says the writ.
Yeah. I mean, he means it as something like, as in something more esoterical, I suppose, rather than something now.
And then the other one, I haven't even written this one out, but I just had like a question on you before I even tried to write this one out. So I was having some questions about this one thing in the Quran. I'm trying to pull it up. 1 second. I have the question right here with this person. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. So I'm just gonna read it out from here. So I wanted to ask a native Arabic speaker, because I'm obviously not one. It was about the topic of the Zabur, because when I was looking at it in like Corpus Qur'an, something popped out to me. So I was thinking, so I was doing some research. I was thinking about making a section about this post about the Bible and the Zabur. So I went on Corpus Qur'an so I could see all the verses that Zabur is mentioned in. So I saw 3 verses that just said, and we gave David our Zabur. But then I saw the other usages of it in the plural. And according to what I've seen, Zabur is obviously not the Arabic word for like the title Psalm. It means writings or scripture. And I'm assuming Zuburi is a plural of Zabur. And that was it. Because when I look at the verses containing Zubur, it for the most part is connected to messengers who were given them before Muhammad along with Al-Kitab. So would the Zabur be the actual thing that's referred to as writings instead of Al-Kitab? Since the Al-Kitab is the prescriptions or the decree, Zabur are the actual like pages of writing that some messengers receive. I was thinking, because that makes me think Jesus was given Al-Kitab and he was given Al-Hikmah, but he's never said to that he was given a Zabur. Which makes sense because he was a peasant in Galilee. He probably couldn't read. Moses was given Al-Kitab, but not a Zabur. Moses might not have been able to read either. But other messengers from the actual like kingdoms, established kingdoms from Israel and Judah and kings, they were given Zabur. David was given Al-Zabur. And other prophets who worked with the kings, they were given Al-Zabur. They were given their own Zabur. So my main question was, maybe we've been thinking about it wrong, and like the Zabur given to David he had his own unique Zabur, but other messengers also received the Zabur. They also received writings. And I was looking at the verse that said the righteous will inherit the earth, because when looking at it from like a historical point of view, the Psalms probably weren't written by David. They definitely written by David. Like they come from a way later time period. But that doesn't mean like David did not receive Zabur. We just don't know what it is. If we even have it, it's just like, what I'm saying is like the word that's translated as the Psalms that's given to David is just David's writings, not like the specific book of the Bible. And I was looking at the verse, as I was saying before, the verse that says the righteous will inherit the earth. That verse isn't even connected to David. It's just saying, and we have it in the writings, the righteous will inherit the earth. And we know that's from the Bible. It just doesn't. So like, is it possible that Zabur is more like, I don't know the word, general than Psalm?
Sorry, I missed that last part.
Is it more likely like the Zabur or Zubur that's more general than just like the Psalms? Is something that other messengers receive?
Is it something that other messengers receive? No, to be honest, I think no. I think it is because it does say, "Well, I think that Dawood is a Zabur, right?" So there's a verse that we gave the Dawood the Zabur, and it does seem something very just. It seems more unique to him, right?
But what I was trying to say was like, yeah, they all got their own Zabur. David's obviously was special for some reason, but like I don't think we should translate Zabur as like Psalms. David got his own unique book. Other messengers got their own books. David's was obviously the most special, but like these scriptures, I feel like people don't look into what Zabur could mean in the Quran. Could be referring to, I should say, could be referring to in the Quran as much.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, it definitely needs more thought. I think it is something which needs more thought. I mean, Zabur, Zabara.
I do have some of the verses that contain it right here. I'm just pulling them up. Like, like chapter 26, verse 195 says, English translation. Verse 194 and 195. Wait, what? Where did it go? Okay, 195 says, in a clear Arabic language, and indeed it is mentioned in the Zubur of former peoples. And I was thinking, if these are in the writings of former peoples, it's not just talking about the Psalms, it's talking about like other writings, like probably the Bible, because that's the primary audience that the Qur'an is talking to, people who are familiar with the Bible, Jews and Christians. And that includes more than just the Psalms or like whatever David wrote or whatever, that this and that. So what really could it be referring to? What specific? It's probably not even talking about anything specific, but like it's just intrigued me. I wanted to think more about it.
Yeah. I don't know. I would need to think about it a bit more. The idea of because yeah, that does mention that verse. We know of Zubur al-Awwalin, right?
Hmm.
Where there it does just seem to mean like I don't know, scripture or something. I mean, Zubur does mean. I mean, you have the word comes up in the story of of Musa of what's called Dhul Qarnayn, right?
Hmm.
Where it says Zubur al Hadid, right?
Hmm.
Saying you have it there. You also have it in what's we call that verse. وقطعناهم في الأرض no فتقطعوا أمرهم بينهم زبرا, right?
Hmm.
So that they were like I think it's about either Bani Israel or mankind. That verse, I'm not sure. I'd have to like look it up. But it says فتقطعوا أمرهم بينهم زبرا, that so their religion sort of like, or their affair was broken up among them into sects, right?
Hmm.
So here Zubur there means sects, right? So you could say when it says في زبر الأولين, it could just mean it means it's an earlier sects, right, rather than scriptures,
Hmm.
right? Earlier like groups, because even like in the story of Dhul Qarnayn, when he says Zubr al Hadid, it means like sort of like flecks of hadid, like bits of iron, right? Just like would say like sects are like bits of religion. Like if you smash up a religion, you have different bits, different sects, which when it gets broken up. In the same way, you can talk about like pieces of iron, which is what Little Qarnayn used. So that then, if we went along that route, it wouldn't be, Zubur al-Awwalin would just mean the sects rather than the scriptures of old, right? And then we would still maintain that Dawood had something unique called Zabur, because, Zubur and Zabur, not exactly the same thing. It's the same root, but it's not the same word, right? So yeah, I mean, yeah, it just needs a bit more thought. Um, like, why is even the Zabur called Zabur, right? I suppose because it's in like almost like in pieces itself, right? If it's like the Psalms, let's say, if it's like different um, pieces of music, right? Like little bits of like poems and stuff like that, sort of like sonnets, like would say like Shakespeare has his sonnets, right? Um, so Dawood had his Zabur, his like pieces of revelation,
Hmm.
right? Um, but then you've got the other verse, وَلَقَدْ كَتَبْنَا فِي الزَّبُورِ مِنْ بَعْدِ الذِّكْرِ أَنَّ الْأَرْضَ يَرِثُهَا عِبَادِي الصَّالِحُونَ, that we wrote in the Zabur after the dhikr, right? After dhikr, that my servants would inherit the earth. It would be interesting to know where does that come in. So I mean, I think that's basically going to be the verse, the meek shall inherit the earth, right?
Hmm.
The meek shall inherit the earth. That's maybe what that verse is referring to. And where does that come up? Does it actually come up in the Psalms?
It does, but
Is it?
what I was thinking was like, when you look at what historians say, they they say like most of the Psalms most definitely did not come from David's time. They come like hundreds of years later. And what was interesting to me about that verse, it just says, and we wrote in Zabur. It doesn't say, and we gave to David. We wrote in David's Zabur. It just says, and we wrote in the scripture.
Yeah.
So
No. Yeah. I know what you mean. I see what you mean. Um, Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, it's not the thing about it's not conclusive, right?
mhm.
So it could be that it's actually just talk about the Zabur of of Dawood. The other thing I would say in the verse where it says what Dawood Zabura, right? It's in the indefinite there. So you're asking about the Arabic. The Arabic there is in the indefinite. So it's just like we gave Dawood a Zabur, rather than the Zabur.
Oh, it doesn't say the?
No, it doesn't say that,
Oh,
right? So
that's even more interesting.
yeah. So it says, it says, وَآتَيْنَا دَاوُودَ زَبُورًا. We gave him a Zabur, right? So it doesn't say the Zabur. Um, so it's not an indefinite article. Like there's only one thing called the Zabur, and it was given to Dawood. So that's probably I think that would be the strongest idea, that the Zabur, um, that there were other Zaburs, so to speak, right?
Mm.
But yeah, so that's what I would say. But that definitely warrants looking into, right?
Mm-hmm.
Warrants looking into. But say, I mean, it comes up twice, right? That in the verse that says, that we gave Dawood a Zabura,
I'm
right?
pretty
That
sure
comes,
it said it like once or twice. I mean, twice or three times.
yeah, it comes up more, definitely more than once, like 2 or 3 times. So it is something significant, because it's mentioned like it's something unique for Dawood, right?
Mm.
And it's even mentioned there. Even I have to go back and look at this, but it's mentioned in lists where are there other, in those
Oh,
same lists where it's mentioned, are there other prophets who have received scriptural revelation that we know about? So it is a
mm-hmm.
verse that I remember. إِنَّا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ كَمَا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى نُوحٍ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ مِن بَعْدِهِ. And then it lists them, right? وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْمَاعِيلَ وَإِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ وَالْأَسْبَاطِ وَعِيسَى وَأَيُّوبَ وَيُونُسَ وَهَارُونَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ وَآتَيْنَا دَاوُودَ زَبُورًا. So yeah, so here we do have sort of like Isa being mentioned, and he was given the Injil, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that list, it's not mentioned that we gave Isa the Injil, but it's just specifically mentioned that وَآتَيْنَا دَاوُودَ زَبُورًا, and we gave Dawood a Zabur. So it's interesting why he's singled out in those verses, right? And we gave Dawood a Zabur, right? If it's something which is not so unique to him. So I don't know, just some thoughts about that. But yes, what you mentioned, what you asked about before, it's definitely in the indefinite. So it doesn't say that we gave him the Psalms. It just says we gave him Psalms, so to speak. If we take Zabur to mean Psalms.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. And there was only one thing I wanted to go over with you from this. So
Yeah. Go ahead.
the last section I wrote about was about Paul, and like the Paul from like Jesus's time. And I wrote a bit about this. I need to like revise it because I know there's some things I got wrong, but I just want to go over it with you, if that's okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so I wrote, now if you asked a lot of Muslims who the biggest enemies of Islam are of all time, they probably list off the following: Satan for being Satan, Pharaoh for enslaving Moses and his people, um, Abu Lahab for what he did, and the Apostle Paul for corrupting Christianity and creating the Trinity. This is clearly ignorance. This is clearly from ignorance on who Paul was and what he believed in, what he taught. With the letters of Paul being literally the earliest first-hand account of the early Christian movement, he is single-handedly one of the most important people to actually understand when you're talking about Christianity, and he might be one of the most important people of all time because of what he did, which I'll be going over in this section. To start off, Paul never met Jesus, which most people already know. In fact, in all his letters, the only quote of Jesus' teachings he says is not to divorce. You may be wondering, if Paul never met Jesus, what gave him the authority to say or even think that Jews shouldn't follow the Jewish law? Why was Paul such an agent of lawlessness? Well, that's the second part. Paul didn't tell people to break the law. He taught that the law was not going to be what saved you. Contrary to popular Muslim belief, Paul was a practicing Jew before the vision and after his vision of Jesus. He just didn't think that Gentiles needed to convert to Judaism and circumcise themselves to be saved. That's it. He just didn't think that non-Jews needed to become Jews. The immediate followers of Jesus, like the 12 disciples, they did think that, and they had like a whole argument about that. Jesus' brother and Peter, they they went at it with Paul, saying that, oh, if they want to be Christians, they have to the Gentiles have to circumcise. Paul was saying no, they didn't. Um, where was I? That is his main point of contention with the original disciples led by Peter and Jesus' brother James. Now, what is Paul's story and why and how did he convert to Christianity? To put it simply, in the way Bart Ehrman explains it, Paul was a very practicing Jew. He was acquainted with the law and the prophecies of the coming Messiah from the Hebrew Bible. Now, after the crucifixion of Jesus, Paul and other Jews see these random Jewish peasants from Galilee saying that the poor rabbi from Nazareth that got crucified by the Romans is the Messiah, the King of Israel. Him being a proper Jew, he thought, they're saying this poor guy who is killed on a tree and is cursed by God is the King of Jerusalem. So he started beating up the followers of Jesus for saying such stupid things. One day, Paul had a vision of what he thinks to be Jesus. This is an ancient Jew from the 1st century. Hallucinations and visions were reality to them. He probably wasn't lying about seeing Jesus, but it was just a vision that he thought was real. Now, Paul being an apocalyptic ancient Jew of the period, he believed that once a person dies, they're really dead. But at the end of time, God is going to resurrect everyone bodily, like what we believe. There was no separation of body and soul. That's different from what we believe. And you are either bodily dead or you're bodily alive. Unlike how we think now, oh yeah, my grandma is gone, but her ghost is in heaven right now. Paul thought Jesus was crucified and fully dead, but had a vision of Jesus appearing alive to him. That wasn't just his spirit appearing, that was Jesus' real body speaking to him. So since at the end of time, people will be fully resurrected bodily, and Paul saw Jesus bodily alive and just crucified, it must have been the end of time currently, and Jesus was the first one to be resurrected. That's why Paul calls Jesus the first fruit of the resurrection. A, far, a farmer God will pick his fruit, Jesus, to see if it's time for harvest. Then the next day, he will pick the rest of the fruits. Not a few thousand years, Paul thought the resurrection would be in his day. In fact, to be the only person raised from the dead, you're God's favorite. You're God's favorite. So Jesus had to be the chosen one of God, the Messiah. So far, we have that Paul was beating up Christians because Jesus was the cursed enemy of God. Then he saw that Jesus was alive according to his own vision. He saw that Jesus was alive, which means God raised him from the dead. He realized that it is the end of the time. He thought it was the end of time, and that Jesus was the Messiah. What's next? Well, from the standpoint of an ancient Jew, he probably thought, if God's chosen one was killed on a cross, that means he's cursed. Why would God's chosen one be cursed? It can't be for anything he did. He's the chosen one. Well, we, ancient Jews and pagans, sacrifice animals to soothe the anger of God. If God had his son killed, then he must have been a sacrifice for the sins of others. So if Jesus was a sacrifice for the sins of others, that's how people sin to
Okay.
removed are removed from their slate. But if God had his chosen one sacrifice to appease him, why do we Jews believe that we are right with God by following the law? Maybe making God proud doesn't come from following the law to the letter, because if it did, why would God sacrifice his own son? So God sacrificed his son because the law isn't enough. And if the law isn't what makes God pleased with us, then that sure means that being Jewish is useless in the grand scheme of things. If you want to be God on God's good side, you don't have to be Jewish and keep the laws. It's about believing in the resurrection of Jesus, because we're about to all die and be resurrected right after him. Because there's no God sacrificing his only chosen one if being Jewish is what saves you. Important note: in the authentic letter of Paul's, the authentic letters of Paul say that law won't save you. The authentic Pauline letters do not undermine doing good deeds or works, though. They just say the law won't save you. So with this new revelation that was given to Paul, quote unquote, he felt that he had to teach the world about it. the original apostles were already telling the other Jews that Jesus was the risen Messiah. But Paul was the one who realized that being Jewish didn't matter. He had to help the Gentiles get saved, and the original apostles didn't think they could do that without them converting to Judaism, which Paul obviously thought was wrong. And since Paul was able to convince people to become Christian and believe in Jesus because they didn't have to circumcise themselves, which obviously that's why he's the person we know today. Paul didn't really have any it seems like Paul didn't really have any what's the word, bad intent. He just thought what he thought, and he was a product of his time. He wasn't a liar like many modern day Muslims think he is, who tried to corrupt Christianity. He just had a train of thought, and that's
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I've never really thought that he was like corrupt Christianity or any of that. It's just, I mean, it's the same sort of process. Like, for example, Shafi'i, right? How some Qur'ans see Shafi'i as the one who created all the evils. No, I mean, he was, again, he like you were just saying about Paul. Shafi'i was a product of his time. Same thing with Bukhari. Same thing with us as well. To be honest, we're also products of our times in many ways.
Many people think if it's not absolutely the truth, you're lying. No, he was just wrong, and then he thought he was right. He just was wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Have you, by the way, you seem to have you've read all of the Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament?
I used to be a Sunday school teacher.
All right, okay, so that's why. So you know this stuff very well, huh?
Yeah, now I'm in my intro to religion class in university. It's just fun to me to study to learn about religions, like the academic side. It's fun. So just implementing that into how I view the Qur'an.
Okay, brilliant, excellent. Very nice.
I did want to one more. It's a very short question. So I haven't been asked this yet, but I used to think the verse 116 that says, "Don't lie with your tongue, saying this is haram, this is allowed." How can one prove that this applied to the prophet? But what if someone says, okay, what if the prophet just wasn't lying when he made this halal and it just wasn't in the Quran? How do we know the halal and haram are already completed within the Quran?
How do we know that the halal and haram are already completed within the Quran? Basically, because when you have the verse which says, "This day I've completed the deen for you and I've perfected my favor upon you," then of course that's going to include the halal and haram, right? It's not going to exclude that stuff. And we have the general principle anyway, right? That what was being made halal is the things which were tayyib, and which was made haram or the things which were khabith.
But to play devil's advocate, what if someone says that verse is revealed after Muhammad already said, yeah, music is haram, this is haram, this is haram. This verse came after it. You need hadith to know that these things are haram because the deen is completed.
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of argument, it wouldn't work if you have a principled stance that the Prophet would not say something which is against the Quran, right? So you have to have that kind of principled position. Otherwise, I suppose you could play that kind of devil's advocate. You could say that the Prophet didn't actually practice what was in the Quran himself, right? You could say these kind of things, but how would you go about sort of even proving that within narrations and stuff? If the Prophet had not practiced what he preached,
I wouldn't say
it would have been
wrong, but just adding things for his people. What if he just made music?
Oh, you mean you mean just little laws for his people, basically, rules for his people. Yeah,
music is around and
I mean, for example, I could accept, for example, him discouraging music for his people, right? but not saying that, not saying it's haram, right? Like, for example, the narration about, which literally says these things are haram, right? Regarding gold and silk, whether these are haram the halal for the women and haram for the men in this ummah, right? Well, we have the verse which literally says, who is the one who is making haram the zina, the adornments that Allah has brought forth, right? And it's a rhetorical question, of course. You're supposed to say nobody is going to make the halal haram, right? And so for you to then somebody to come along and say, yeah, no, the Prophet did do that, it's just too much of it's a flat out contradiction. You have to have a starting point of having a principled belief that the Prophet would follow what was in the Quran. I mean, he is quoted in the Quran as saying that I am only following what was inspired to me, right? So it comes down to having, basically, if you want to strip it down right to the bottom, right, it comes down to having some faith, some trust that the Prophet did follow the Quran, right? That he did not just add things of his own accord.
That makes sense. And my final, this is my actual final question. What would you suggest? What would you suggest would be a way for me, as someone who doesn't know how to speak or read Arabic, to learn like good history? Because obviously, like, I want to know like which hadiths I should like think. I know, like, if it goes along with the Quran, it's good. I just want to know like history. I want to learn
the history. Yeah, no, the history is difficult to get into without having Arabic. Well, it's not sort of that difficult because you do have English speaking, of course, big sects which have done work about the history and stuff, like the Shia have got a lot of the things which are in Arabic translated. But the issue is putting it together without being pulled into sort of some of their some of their own sort of like bent on things. But what I would say, that the very first thing is to try to get the history that's in the Quran already, right? And there's actually quite a lot of history which is in the Quran, which is skipped out, right? Because the Quran doesn't really focus on the history, but if you pay attention, you can see certain things, right? So having the basic idea of having, for example, the chronology of the Quran, right? The sort of like the surah order in general, right? Because there will be things which aren't exactly there, but generally knowing which surahs were early Mecca, middle Mecca, late Mecca, early Medina, middle Medina, late Medina, right? And then be able to see from them, see how it reflects a little bit the happenings at the time, right? So one obvious one is to see that hypocrisy was actually increasing, right? That during the Prophet's lifetime, it was increasing. That the earlier surahs in Mecca, they only mention hypocrites a few times, and then as you go along, hypocrites get mentioned more and more and more. What does that mean? Well, that means that there must be increasing in Medina society, right? That the very last surahs revealed in Mecca, like for example Surah Yasin, right? When it talks about that the kuffar are not going to become, they're never going to believe, that it refers obviously to the kuffar of Mecca, right? And then extrapolating that to say, أكثرهم لا يؤمنون, most of them will not have faith, they will not become believers, right? So that means the people of Mecca. So then later, when in the Seerah you have things, the conquest of Mecca and all of the people of Mecca have apparently become Muslims, then you can understand that yes, you can accept that they were Muslim, but not people of faith. They weren't of the faithful, right? which is, again, it shows that the Quran is being very specific. أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, most of them will not have faith, and most of them didn't in the end, right? So that's why they call, the Prophet called them tulaqa, those who were sort of like freed. But the idea of what it lets you know that up to that point, the Meccans, the majority of them were not people of faith. So then when you read about what happens later, right? All the way up to when the Prophet passed away, and after he passed away, you have something to work on. You don't have this rose-tinted view of the traditional idea, which is that all of the Sahaba were completely they were devoid of hypocrisy at the time, and they were all one behind the Prophet, etc. No. So the point is, you have different bits of history in the Quran. One thing which is definitely not studied much is trying to see the discourse development, right, in Mecca and Medina, especially in Mecca at first, before the Prophet did the Hijrah. How was you can sort of try to ascertain how the discourse was developing by what the Quran is bringing up, right? There's a certain period in Mecca where the stories were being brought of the people of the past and how they were destroyed and stuff like that. That doesn't come; those aren't part of the earlier surahs, right? Which makes sense. You're not gonna those kind of stories. Not gonna because those sort of stories are a warning, right? Are warning about those who rejected their messengers and what happened to them. So those aren't going to be first, right? So how did the sort of the dialogue advance? Because you don't get much of that in the Seerah, but you should be able to see it in the Quran, right? How the dialogue between them developed, right? So at first, let's say, for example, because I haven't looked at this myself, but let's say in the beginning, what's being mentioned is mostly the things about virtue and being people of good deeds, of good character, of these sort of things, and then maybe the issue of the resurrection becomes a key issue, right? And then you start seeing a lot of verses come up which try to make them think that there will be a resurrection, trying to quote unquote prove the resurrection, and then maybe there'll be a year or two where it's a lot of verses and surahs are focused more on signs of nature, like in Surah An-Nahl, in the surah of the bees and stuff like that. And then maybe later after that, you get in sort of more a late Meccan period, you start to get the stories of the earlier Arabs who were destroyed, of Ad and Thamud and these sort of things, to sort of like be try reach them in that way, right? So you can try to follow a thread of the dialogue, the history of the dialogue as well, not just the things that happened or didn't happen in terms of battles and whatnot, And it's a tragedy that the seerahs are basically called maghazi. They're called the battles of the Prophet, right? So the books which are meant to be seerah, right? That's what they call it. They're called the battles because that's what a lot of them focused on.
Thank you so much. Sorry for holding you up so long.
No problem. It's fine. Okay, it was actually brilliant having you. Thank you so much. I'm glad I got to wait around until you were able to to escape from your meeting, huh?
Yes, thank you so much. I want to come on more often.
Yeah. More than welcome anytime.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good day, sir.
You too. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Take care. No problem. All right. That was nice. Nice discussion. A lot of excellent thoughts and ideas from my brother there. Alif, I see you backstage. I'm going to bring you on. I can't stay for too long, though, to be honest. It's getting pretty late here. Assalamu alaikum. Hello. Assalamu alaikum. Maybe the mic is not there. Give him a bit. Anytime. Anytime. I think Paul lied about his vision. Yeah, I mean, it could be a lie, it could be just a delusion. I think, yeah, that probably a lie, to be honest, but um, can happen. Could be also literally, don't forget, Shaitan is there, right? Let me check the comments. Hello, Salam Alif, you there? Okay, doesn't seem to be with us. Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't add you to the stage. Okay, hello. Yes, I can
hey,
hear you now. I think.
Assalamu
Hey, there
alaikum.
you are. Wa alaikum assalam. There you are. I thought
Yeah, I
I
won't
added
keep
you
you
to
up.
the stage, but I didn't.
I won't keep you till 1 in the morning this time.
It's fine.
Um, so you gotta love the internet. People call you kafir very well. This is like typical of the sort of deputization of Qadi roles that everybody takfirs on first sight, of
Yeah.
anything that and I think the big issue, the big pathology with why Muslims treat each other so badly, not this guy's kind of reasonable,
Mm.
um, is but the other guy over the mortgage thing. And I
Yeah.
do think you're wrong about that, but I wouldn't tack for you over a disagreement, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
what if what if that makes me a kafir? Because maybe I'm wrong, right? So that's not good business. And
Mm.
enjoining the good and forbidding the bad. So everybody's a qadi, so everybody's calling each other out all the time.
Mm.
And then some other guy will call out the other guy for being shooting from the hip, and then that
Mm.
guy will like call him a dawuth, which would technically merit whipping, right? Like throwing around dawuth.
Yeah.
So with this whole East versus West thing, Elon Musk is trying to get everybody to start lynch mobbing Muslims in the
Yeah.
UK as a test bed. Um,
Yeah. It's
and it's
crazy.
like,
I mean,
I,
it's like, what are you doing? You've got nothing better to do with your time. Why?
yeah, I took a
You're
look at
not
his
even in the,
feed,
you're
and
not,
it's
he's not even in the UK. That's the thing. He's like, you're in America.
right, but he likes to play like he's a deity or a pharaoh or something
Yeah.
in his way. But yeah, you would think he'd be busy with like deep tech and not the clash of civ stuff. But yeah, his feed is all like, oh, look at this crime that Muslims did. But the thing is, if we did Sharia that was Quranic and you could opt out of it, so you don't want to get whipped for, you know, having casual relations. So you say, well, I guess I'm out. And then, maybe you go to hell for that. But that's kind of your business. People aren't going to execute you for it. But if you want to be a Muslim, then the Muslims could have courts under the US laws, like a sort of arbitration court. And we're not talking about capital punishment. Now, for that, I think, for like the grooming gangs and such, and all these right wingers are complaining about how they're so soft on crime and all these criminal Muslims and so on. And they even like these people honestly confuse things like honor killings
Yeah.
or sexual assault as being a part of the religion. Now, to be fair, when you had fiqh, where you could make a war of aggression, one, two,
Mm.
take captives,
Yes.
and then three, have concubinage.
Yeah.
In a sense, that was considered part of the religion. So they have a little
Yeah.
something there. Um, and that, along with things like the Aisha, there's a number of things that really plague Islam. But if we enforced the law on the Muslim criminals, then I think
Mm.
maybe we would have a more exemplary community in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
saw you mentioned that somewhere as well. You were saying
yeah,
yesterday.
on Harry Alep's house, I didn't chime into the space, but when those guys are more like Sufi Sunni, so they're kind of like chill in practice, and then in theory they affirm some of these things that are not correct.
Mm.
Some of these delusions of the tradition, but um, so regarding riba, um, I do think it's important for Muslims, and Muslims are not alone in this, In fact, the Christians used to do this as part of their like Catholic Sharia, right?
Mm.
Anti-usury. That's why you
Yeah.
get the whole Merchant of Venice thing, right?
Mm.
Because they were in the regulatory carve out, the Jewish people. And notice I say Jewish. I'm not for anti-Semitism, despite what's going on in Gaza. This is also like worse than you. This is worse than useless when people
Yeah.
react with they overshoot anti-Zionism into anti-Semitism and make
Mm.
anti-Zionism look like hate speech instead of resisting genocide. It's a very important point. But I think we spoke about this last time we talked. Basically, you put in kind of a put option where you're buying back shares from the financing company, and it's at a fixed thing. And so the put option is that if you go into default, you're just eroding your equity and you don't get foreclosed on as quickly. It depends on how much equity you have. And that flexibility is worth a little bit more of a vig. And if they were really good Muslims, maybe they wouldn't add this. This is what like Canadian Muslims, for example, they have a special thing for that. Now they've made it easier for them to get the financing, but it's a few percent PA more expensive.
Mm.
This is what optionality premium does. If you buy stock on margin or you buy futures at some small premium, your cost of carry is going to be lower than if you did it all with call options. But with the call option, you don't get wrecked as immediately if the stock goes down, right? And also that's kind of gambling, but it illustrates the mathematics. And so I do think it's important that both large pools of Muslim capital try to make these things cheaper and more
Yeah.
plentiful so that Muslim communities can be better off. And
Mm.
what Mufti Abu Layth made the same point that you've made, which is that nobody's going to put you in debtor's prison or come break your kneecaps, etc. And these are secured loans, but the
Mm.
foreclosure thing isn't great. People
Yeah.
get put out in the street.
Yeah, that's true.
But I still think we should do better. And whether or not that the curse hadith is true, or if a curse is like synonymous for mortal sin, for
Mm.
grave sin, or it's just not a good thing to have, but you could still go to, but you're gonna have some penalty for having a
Mm.
curse. It's like maybe don't get cursed, and maybe it doesn't curse you, but it's in a way it does impact your financing. So the theory is, well,
Mm.
I'll save money on rent relative to the equity that I'm accumulating, and it's very
Mm.
useful therefore to have access to the mortgage financing.
Yeah.
But with interest rates where they are in the late capitalist housing bubble where it is, I'm not sure if that's. Obviously that was true for decades. I don't know if that's quite true anymore.
Mm.
I've seen a lot of stories of people complaining about they bought this house at like a mill whatever, and their mortgage is like 7K a month, and if they were renting they would pay 4K, and it becomes the interest is a big portion. They pay like,
Yeah.
yeah, you get the idea.
Mm.
And when you take it out to 15 or 20 years, you really are paying like double the value of the house,
Yeah.
and it fuels this bubble in housing. Housing before like the 1980s was really did not outperform inflation. It was basically a commodity, and this was also in a time where we had the biggest population boom in human history. And so this is kind of the crux of why young people feel despondent and they are more prone to zina, and they get pregnant maybe at 35 or something, or 32, and they have like one kid. This is because of the cost of housing.
Mm.
Um, so alternatives to that would be going back to commodity money. So the Sunnah version of that would be gold and silver. The modern version of that would be Bitcoin. So instead of creating currency by lending it into issuance, you have the price of the commodity go up, and then
Mm.
you can mint currency against that instead. But anyway, I don't want to get too far afield on that. Um, but you do love to put out these lightning rods and incur some engagement on Twitter. Right.
Yeah, there's sometimes they're unexpected, to be honest. And sometimes I think, okay, this is it's been said already. I don't think anybody's gonna notice about that, but then something he just gets caught on. The interesting thing I actually saw, I think it was today, was something about housing in Beijing or something in China, that people over there are trying to sell their houses and they can't, right? There's
Yeah,
so
because it
much,
was all bubble. There's no demand.
yeah, there's no demand at all, right? So it's now it's like insanely cheap or something to buy a place over there. So I mean,
Well, that's been true in Japan for a while. Like if you have a remote, the problem is everybody's got corporate jobs. They don't want to live in Tokyo and take the subway. They don't want to, but it's kind of what the gravity is. But if you can live in the hills or one of the T2 or T3 cities, it's just cheap real estate everywhere. There's a resort that was built in 1989 or 1990 at the peak of the bubble that
really.
you can get like 300 or 400 acres for like $1 million with all these structures. I mean, it's like a $10 million property, right? Like that's
Yeah,
deflation. So
I heard that what in Japan, most people like they build their own houses, like they buy land and build a house, right, or something like that.
well, that's the other thing is they don't have these old like colonial style houses with cement brick bones from the 1850s or they depreciate the house completely over 40 years. I think because they're paranoid about ghosts, right? But that's that shit table for you. Um, but yeah, since we have like peak population, basically, um, it's going to be like real estate's not really that good of an investment. So it's actually bad financial advice to whether it's a mortgage or cat. It's actually smarter to rent, and then how do you get the yield if you're not chasing Bitcoin? It's haram to like clip coupons from the government. Um, that's another open question. But I wouldn't recommend real
Yeah.
estate as an asset class at this time. So why get cursed on top on top of that? If there is a curse indeed, and like I'll listen to these Qur'anic guys call into the Sunni guys, and the Sunni guys actually make a thoughtful usuli elaboration, which might be cope, it might be injecting a solder, like caulk to fill the gaps.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the thoughtfulness of that. And these are very so like there was a young fella who called into Muhammad's stream on Friday, and he wasn't doing a good job of explaining why there are some hadiths that are actually useful. He didn't cite any good examples, but I tend to have agnosticism when it comes to some of these hadiths that don't have a map that goes against the Quran, right? So, like for instance, the anti-lending hadith that all these people are cursed in these transactions. The Quran's definitely not pro lending. You might say, but that's a specific extreme type of lending. There's notably a hadith from Umar where he laments the lack of clarity on the subject because, of course, it's useful to do financing deals. So this is not a new dilemma that Muslims have pondered. Like where exactly does that word fall? Because it's talking about a major sin, so you want to know, right? And I was at the masjid, and I was saying, I turned 40 recently. You're supposed to get wisdom at 40. So I said I find that wisdom is focusing on like feeding the widows and not spending too much time discussing things. And then my friend who's like 56 started. He's a convert as well. He started going on of Islam's very simple. You do this and that, and you avoid these sins, and then you die, and the angels come and question you, and then you get punished or you get the cool breeze until Judgment Day. And he's like, and that's in the Quran and the Hadith. And I said, well, it's in the Hadith. You can read the Quran two ways. And suddenly there was this. He's cooler, but there's this other guy who's from Syria. He's been in Chile for some decades, and his son has an ijaza, and they're like, this is it's very like Saudi. The Sunni community is very much by default Saudi communique oriented Salafi people. There are some Shafis, and we had some Hanafi guys come for the Hafiz come to visit for Ramadan to do we had some Diobandi visitors, but yeah, I mean they're like pretty conservative, right? And I don't do this internet thing with it. I just go to the masjid once every 3 weeks. It's a little drive, and I get my ajr. I do the thing. We chat. We have a tea. We maybe eat some fish, and it's friendly. I don't get into the discussions, but so this time
Yeah.
actually, I said, well, actually, technically, that's not quite like explicit to the Quran, and it was like, wow. Suddenly, I pierced the surface of
Yeah.
this agreeing to not discuss things. But
Yeah, it happens.
it makes
You
people very
gotta,
uncomfortable. Yeah, it's like, and so then the Syrian guy started talking about the hadith of not saying what you don't know about and how his son has an ijaza and all this stuff.
mm.
And so I figured, okay, I'll leave well enough alone on that.
That's enough for
um,
now. Huh?
yeah. I don't want to like, and it was like the three of us. I mean, there aren't very many Muslims in Chile,
Mm.
especially in my neck of the woods. So there are masjids where and sometimes at that little musalla, it's owned land, so technically it's a masjid. It's just not very
Mm.
impressive. They call it a musalla, but sometimes we'll have like 12 or 15 people there, and the other ones you get a lot more people. But yeah, I don't want to stink up my man
Yeah.
vibes with
For the
Ikhtilaf.
best, to be honest. Yeah.
And I go and I pray with the Shia a few times a year, and that's interesting. Albeit, I would say the Shia are better Muslims, which means that there are sanctions by the U.S. government on the big Shia country.
Mm.
So that is weird a little bit. And then I can get into more interesting stuff with them because they're more into, like for instance, Zarathustra, alayhi salam, being essentially a prophet of God and a part
Mm.
of the lineage of this like Judgment Day teaching. The one guy has like a comparative religion degree, so he was actually cool with that. So like I mean, the Twelvers aren't as like weird as the Ismailis. They're kind of like maybe a little bit more esoteric than Sufis, but they're into this idea that there's like esoteric layers of initiation, and there's like
Mm.
the common layer, and then you can key into stuff, and it's not just like,
Yeah.
do you know all the hadith laws or not? It's a little bit more
Yeah.
fun. And then I don't get into it with them about, well, the Buyids probably wanted Khomeini's book to justify their rule. It was sort of a backdoor taqlid where Jafar is allegedly saying a bunch of things that Shafi said or Umar said in the Muwatta, and it's weird that he would say the same thing, like about Bida or about Rajam.
Mm.
And this is why Iran kind of sucks, is because this sort of like backdoor taqlid by attributing things to Jafar. And you can get away with in Hum theoretically, not maybe not now, but maybe like 3 years ago when things were geopolitically more chill. You
Mm.
could get away with saying, I don't think these particular hadiths are sahih. These might be, and I don't think they're Hassan because the Matan is against the Quran. So I think they're daif. And you can basically say that in Itna Ashari Shiism.
Mm.
Um, so I think there's hope there. And I think that the Qurani and Quran centric community should, like, essentially, it's you're not automatically out, including of like formally being in Hom, getting a stipend from the government by re-rating hadiths in Al Kafi
Mm.
the way that you kind of like. Remember Mufti Abu Layth, Buhari Gate,
Yeah.
and the backlash. And
Mm.
that was great because he's a mufti, like he's got the ijaza and then he got the PhD, and everyone
Mm.
was disowning him. And there was this one Pakistani guy who came on who was nice enough to talk through some of the weirder hadiths, like the woman rebuking the prophet, or the stone that stole Musa's Islam's underwear, right? Like
Yeah.
that Abu Layth was, trying to downgrade. So people can do apologetics for all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I mean, now we see, at the time, Yasser Qadi was kind of, joining out. He called him a Dajjal with a little d. Like he's not even super Dajjalic. He's just kind of
Yeah.
Bush League Dajjal. So he started calling Yasser Qadi the Beloved. That was like the pet name, right? Which was that's kind of Mufti Awlay's akhlaq back then. Now it's a little bit more refined. But I thought it was fun. And now Yasser Qadi is kind of like, it doesn't really stand up to the historical critical method. And I am also a scholar in addition to being a Sunni Muslim, right?
Yeah. I mean,
So now people want to disown him, right? This is
yeah,
that conveyor
yeah.
belt.
What was the thing I saw just a little while ago? That guy Fareed posting a pic of Yasser Qadi being invited to some convention, some convention in Canada. He's saying, what more red lines does he have to cross for him not to be invited into conventions? Talking about Yasser Qadi.
Yeah, regarding like Hadith maximalism. What's the funny thing about Fareed is he has good akhlaq, and then it's just that the internet. This is actually Muhammad's dilemma as well. Is that, and he acknowledges this, and he kind of rational. It's kind of like, we're Hamas, and these rockets are going to kill some innocent civilians, but they're not really innocent. And this is just how jihad is waged. It's like we start. It's the same thing with the mortgage thing. It's like we make compromises with the adversarial environment that we're navigating, and rationalize it as being a part of the greater good, right? So Fareed does that, right? And Muhammad, you don't do, like we talked about this last time. Like you don't do that, and that's kind of why. Like if you got into more beefy, ooh, what's that? Like little shorts, like and then he dunks this guy. If you did that kind of content, you would get more clicks, right? Like this, you would run the mill more. But it's good that you don't. I think that you're relatively pure, and when people tack for you and so on, you engage them with like good faith rhetorical kind of invitations to ponder. You're pretty consistent with that.
Right.
So I wanted to add about Paul is that just one last thing about Yasser Qadi. So after he went on Skepsis Islamica, and he's kind of was like, the hadith, nobody in the academy like takes it seriously. It is what it is. Like I compartmentalized as a believer. And then all the guys, he went on Thinking Muslim. He had a lovely discussion about his book Understanding Salafism, where he basically said that the deen is big, and that's good, and Allah's requirements for Akida are not detailed and narrow, and people have different kinds of personality dispositions that attract them to different madhabi orientations or different sect orientations. And I really think that is a great message, and I think that's what we need to be promulgating, and reduce the total ikhtilaf and fitna and facade.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true, especially for a lot of some of these intellectual kind of, well, not intellectual, but some of the things that people just want to argue about. Like the sifat of Allah and this and that, and those kind of things. I mean, you have to understand just people. You have different type of people. People have different types of mind. Sort of like they can't. Some people will be able to conceptualize things in a very abstract way. Some people are just they see things visually too much, right? So the ones who see things visually very strongly, that when you describe something, they see it in their mind's eye. They might react more negatively to having an Aqeedah book filled with saying that God has two real hands and this or that or the other. But somebody else, they don't. Just saying the word hand doesn't evoke the image of hand in their mind. It evokes the idea of action or something, right? So it's not people's minds.
The Ash'ari are reasonable in that regard, and technically, the Ash'ari also believe in a created Quran vis-a-vis the vernacular that this book has in some level, despite having a lot of layerings of esoteric
Yeah.
and intertextual and scholarly
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
chestnuts for future. It is for also the vernacular of these people in this idiom, and that's the kalam nafsi, right? So it's different from
Yeah.
from the eternal semantic intent of
Yeah.
Allah.
Yeah.
And I noticed one of the guys when you did the mortgage thing who was coming out, he didn't just jump to takfir. He said, "And do you believe that the attributes are distinct?" Right. So
Yeah. I
then
was like,
you would go, "Actually, no. I believe Allah is absolutely one, and the mercy and the
mm,
justice and the hikmah, they're all one thing." And then you
mm,
go, but that's deviance because in the
yeah.
Ashari Akida,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then
Yeah.
it's almost like I follow some Unitarian Christian guys and I see them get takfired by Christian Trinitarians. So it's not just a
Mm,
Muslim thing.
yeah.
And it's almost like the same, like the Sifat, people will kick up a Trinitarian takfir type thing. Is like, no, you can't believe Allah is one in terms of the attributes.
Yeah.
Like what? Like, it's funny. But when Muslims do this stuff on social media, we repel people from converting, or
Yeah.
we encourage people who have converted recently to burn out and churn out.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
it's not a good thing, and then of course they may injure their own souls as well. So it's kind of like Hamas doing some crimes and then baiting Israel into going to horrible extremes, and it's having an effect of damaging Israel. But maybe some of those IDF guys wouldn't have gone to hell. I don't know, or whatever. And maybe obviously these people could have had nice lives that have been cut short, right?
Mm,
So is that right? Is that like? I mean, do you think Hamas? I mean, like it seems like there is some fruit coming out of all this insanity with the Arab pacts and EU recognizing
mm,
Palestine, and it's going to cut off Israel and accelerate their economic and social decohesion and so on. Do you
mm.
think that's worth it for what has been born out of this?
No. No. I mean, in the end, the price they paid is high. I mean, is it worth it? I think in the end, in many ways, I don't think that any liberation struggle like the wins over that it was worth all alive. But it's almost like it's something which is necessary because sometimes some things are just necessary even though they're not really worth it. Um, just in the long term, they are just more necessary. So it is in the end a people's liberation struggle, right? The the Palestinians. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I'm been between two minds in that. Um,
If they didn't go ham on the Hibbuses and they went and they like occupied a military base that had been, de-staffed and were holding everyone there hostage and got into a big shootout and then, died valiantly in this purely military engagement with zero war crimes by UN
mm,
definition or Hadith Quran definition, right?
mm,
And this is actually that's another hadith that's actually good that tightens up on the Quran is even though it's right next to it in Sahih Muslim is another one saying, yeah, they're of them, don't worry about it. But the one where people are castigated by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for killing civilians in war and
mm,
saying don't do that. And this was good. This had good effect that the Christians didn't stick to, even though you might think they would extrapolate the same idea because Christ is supposed to be pacifist. But in the Crusades, they did all kinds of butchery, and like Salahuddin did not, right? So much. They enslaved some people. They tried to negotiate it down. Um, it's a little tight, So the Muslims were not great with the slavery thing, but better on
mm.
the with the genocide. And the Ottomans did some genocide, but it's outside of the Sunnah. Um, and the Hawarij maybe could have benefited from that hadith, right? Because they were just doing straight up terrorism. So you can get that. This is a point I often come back to. So I think that if they had done things like that, it would not have given the PR fuel for the fire for Israel to go quite as hardcore as they have.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then if
but
they just started,
I think that Israel would have found another way, right? And in the end,
Sure.
it was allowed to happen, isn't it? I mean, it's Israel, right now it's allowed October 7th to happen.
100%.
Um,
Uh,
so they would have
9/11
found,
all over again.
yeah, yeah.
They,
So
yeah,
they
they even
you know it
tweaked
was,
the numbers. They went from 9
yeah,
to 10, and then they,
yeah,
7/11, yeah, 9 and 10, yeah.
yeah.
Um, so
So
anyway,
they would have found something. In the end, it was obvious that the goal of Hamas was to go in and just grab hostages, right? That was their goal, to grab hostages, take them back, exchange them for other hostages. Um, and it was that much. I don't think they were out to like commit atrocities and kill Jews and this and that. At the same time, you have to wonder with yourself about the mentality of anybody who would live in occupied territories anyway, because I mean, it's very easy to just say, okay, those are civilians who are living there, but the civilians who are occupying, who are in the occupied territories, who are sort of like right up there against the are they really civilians, or are they just the end part of the expansion? They're part of the military arm. They're part of they are like the human shield, basically, right?
well, yeah, they're all
Um,
conscripts by adulthood, right? That's part of
I
the
mean,
rules,
now
right?
when when
You
when
got to be
when
careful though.
when when Gaza gets completely, um, yeah, let's
Ethnically
say it gets
cleansed.
complete ethnic cleanse, right? Um, the people who end up and then they come and decide to like build, I don't know, hotels or rivieras or amazing real estate in Gaza. People who go and live
Right.
there. Oh, are we going to consider them as well? Just normal civilians? Are they just normal civilians, or are they part of the actual occupation of the actual thing? So,
I
um,
would say they're definitely guilty spiritually. I don't know if the hadud of execution is meriting
well, I
in
wouldn't
any
say
of
that
these tech
the
guys.
execution, but would they be people? Would they be allowed to sort of like if the resistance continues somewhere else, right? Would the people there be allowed to be targets of military thing? So of course I'm not talking about kids there or young people or things, but somebody who's old enough, after this, the whole world is declared as a genocide. What you're doing is a genocide, it's ethnic cleanse, and you've admitted it, and then you go and you live there, right? Um, you're no longer. I don't find. Are you just a civilian, right? You're not really so much a
Maybe
civilian.
what
You're
they'll do
part.
is they'll actually give the Palestinians this tokenized, blockchain,
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah. I've heard about that,
right?
but
And
ridiculous,
and
isn't
so
it?
this is like a 100 and some $1,000 value on top
Mm,
of like 30K value. And so they kind of whitewash it that way. And there's a right of returns, or maybe it comes with an actual right of return. However, instead of being monitored by Hamas about the hutbas and so on, you're going to be living in this AI dystopia, which is what they're trying to roll out everywhere in China and the
mm,
US. The line, which probably is going to be stillborn, but this is the not necessarily, this is the blueprint, right? Is that
mm,
you're like in this matrix of continuous surveillance where Palantir can mark you as a dissident and so on. And we kind of have it a little bit on X, like I'm shadow banned, and where you're not shadow banned as a Muslim is when you're engaging in dialectics and you're creating this like kind of Muslim filth content of like sectarian back and forth because it makes Muslims look bad, right? So the
yeah,
algo is giving Muslims something to do, but if you want to like do business or you just want to raise money for Gaza or you want to promote a like Islam isn't really about this because Elon's pushing this narrative, right? So the Christian Zios, the types, etc.
mm,
The atheists, people like Aaron Ra who really hate Islam. It's like the worst, worse than Christianity. They hate Christianity, right? They um they have to paint Islam as the only true Islam is this kind of extremist
yeah,
Salafist thing, like the guy who was saying that infant mortality is Sunnah, basically saying that terrorism is good. Like maybe that guy's a fed, like I don't know, but like these voices exist. We know that they exist. We understand their epistemology, and we can debate, and that there are also many intermediate positions, and that Islam is actually pretty diverse. But if you start to go accepting that, then you humanize Muslims too much, and you start to think, well,
Mm.
maybe we could actually make deals with some of these Muslims because their definition of nifaq is not necessarily like Surah 60 says. Maybe if we're willing to make peace with them, they can follow that surah. They can make a deal with us. We can live in peace. And they're they're rationalist Muslims. In fact, Baruch Spinoza was something of a fan of Islam. He didn't convert, but he was a big fan of the rationalist tradition in Islam, and he found it
Mm.
more intellectually stimulating than what Christianity was in his time. Of course, Christianity has
Mm.
caught up a lot since then, right? But um, so this kind of thing cannot be promoted, right?
Yeah.
Can't we? And this is the thing is like I've been trying to come up with a dawah that of like Islam being decent, being kind of like Christianity, but with some of the uh, fuzzy things, like you can't get divorced under any circumstances, or like you can't ever pray in public or whatever. Some of these things are softened, so it's a little more reasonable, a little more moderated. And obviously, Unitarian and pro reason, and pro science. And it's
Mm.
just this is not like the people who hate Islam and the people who takfir you are actually on the same team, which
Yeah.
is Team Satan, basically, right? Um, which is the theme of this episode, so it's on topic.
Mm.
Um, so anyway, I'm gonna let you go. So, I just want to close about just following up what the brother said about Paul. Yeah, Paul gets a bad rap. He's definitely not awesome. He's not like the best guy, but he's not. He didn't invent the Trinity for one thing.
Yeah.
And this is kind of fitting onto what I just said about the painting of this is like uh, seven out of the 13 letters of Paul in the New Testament, seven are considered by scholars to be historically penned by him.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that are like really shouting down women, that's like a later reaction by someone in the tradition to this woman Marcelin, who was like a female priest, and they didn't like that. So they go, oh well, here's Paul. Let's put some words. Let's manufacture a hadith
Yeah.
with the authority of Paul, and so on. So then they also some of these ones they'll capitalize spirit and things like this to make Paul look like a Trinitarian. You also get this in the Didache, chapter 7. Obviously, the Gospel of John is heavily redacted. The Gospel of John is definitely a Platonist theology. It's pretty hard not to say it isn't. And also Mark is like very close to Islam, but it's definitely got a. It seems like Mark misunderstood Son of Man in Daniel 7, and
Mm-hmm.
where later in Daniel 7, an angel comes out and he's like, let me tell you what that was about. The Son of Man that you saw is the entire nation of Israel and all of the saints being vindicated and triumphant, ruling the world in the kingdom of God. I was like, oh, okay. This is a corporate Son of Man, right? This is why it's all of us, or inshallah, right? That we can be a part of that. Um,
Mm.
so in the James Tabor interpretation, he kind of strips it down more, but it's pretty plausible that like Mark's author was somebody who believed in a penal atonement, which is something that Paul kind of taught. And certainly there's tension in the Gospel of John between Unitarian statements and theopathic statements, which get rationalized by the fact that there are both of these in the same text into the Trinity, where how could God worship God? Well, he's like the second person of God. So there's these prepositions can both be true. This is how they come up with that, right? And then they'll get mad at you and they'll say, you're rejecting things Jesus said about himself, and irrespective of the veracity of that text, and that's a text that did not show up in the metadata until like the 1080s. So I would say that the Shafi of Christianity was more like Irenaeus, where you start to get identification by exclusion of other groups as being unorthodox, and then a codification of what is orthodox. And this is like late second century. Um, and it wasn't quite him, but it was around that time, maybe 170s, where Gospel of John begins to show up as being like, we like this text. Um, the other Gospels don't show up until about 130s with Papias, who, funnily enough, is considered to be something of a buffoon, kind of almost like an Abu Huraira. So that's another one, is people say Paul is like the Abu Huraira of Christianity, or vice versa, right? But I would say maybe it's Papias, actually, because his
Papias.
history book is where you get a mention of these texts. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just asking. Like, I've never heard of Papias.
Yeah, digging into this stuff, these figures. I mean, we've studied on, Ibn Abbas, and then you get down to Al Mamun, and the Abbasids kind of workshopped the theology, and we understand. I mean, you're actually kind of more of an expert than I am, because you're more of a student of Al Maliki. Um, but yeah, there's a similar procession of figures in Christianity who do the work of kind of glomming these things together and creating the isnad, if you will. And when you talk to Orthodox Trinitarians, they will affirm an isnad that is fairly rigorous. And of course, one of these is that the father of Marcion was supposedly a disciple of one of these apostles as well, right? So he's got an isnad, he's got the ijazah. That's probably why he had so much cachet. He didn't just roll up. But anyway, I don't want to get too. That's a whole that's a whole other side of these things. So, getting back to Paul, I think what Paul's definitely guilty of being arrogant in the letters that are considered to be authentic to Paul. He talks about, oh, these so-called apostles and whatever they are, it means nothing to me, because I had the vision of the risen Jesus, like slowly came to me. So I'm like, so he was arrogant over on the wahi, and this is definitely a cautionary point for those of us, as we are often, not me so much, because I don't stick my neck out as much in the Muslim discourse, but you're following your hawa, you're following your desires, you're making an ibadah of yourself, etc. And there's a verse in the Quran, he who claims that has been inspired, but he's just deluding himself, right? So it's like, be careful with that, right? But then again, there is this kind of thing at some level, right, with the Sufis. And so my theory, my meta theory, is that this other type of revelation, what you call wahi, or a lower degree of wahi, comes through the Ruh al-Hudus, which is not Jibril, has a different function of Jibril. And this is why you have the story from the infancy gospel of Thomas in Surah Miriam. And this is like an infant, a newborn with cognitive abilities to speak beyond simply having been imparted those words. Is like, he's got this superpower, right? This is like Holy Spirit activity. And even if that apocryphal gospel does not have an isnad, because this is like a 3rd century text, so that's a weird thing for me in doing this study. There's a few weird things, but that's only one of them. But the way I take it is that story is meant to illustrate that Christ can be the Word of God, Kalimullah, which is in the follow-up verses, and that he can be empowered by the Ruh, and that these things are created entities that are servants of God, and not some kind, like organal attributes, or part of God. And this is, typical thematic rhetoric of the Quran, is like setting this, here's this thing that people have made hulul on, setting it aside, toning it down a little bit, but affirming some of the parts of it, right? So God could have gone with like a James Tabor, like lower Christology in the Quran, but he went with the virgin birth, and he went with, baby Jesus is miraculous Jesus, more miraculous than other prophets.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. It's not the most palatable Christology to try and softball Christianity for a modern audience who's born as amenable to miracles. but it makes sense at the time. So Paul was arrogant, and oftentimes like people can receive inspiration and have actually had something and become arrogant as a consequence of that, right? So this is like the high level shaitan challenge, is that okay, now you're on like level 4 or whatever of divine esoteric initiation, and you're doing a lot, you're making a career out of it, you're doing good things with it, and now you're like, oh, I'm better than these other, you know, these scrubs from Galilee, like, you know, they're not as cool as I am, right? Like he definitely, like, that's in the letters, right? So that's not good. And then he said, like, if an angel comes to you and tells you a different kind of gospel, don't believe that angel, which is hilarious. But, so he's really trying to, like, he's in these letters, he's always asserting himself as an authority. He's kind of begging the question a little bit. So this kind of is like a red flag, right? And then I think the thing that he's like, his overall, as the brother was saying, his overall view was more that we have a path to attain divine glorification following in the precedent of Jesus. So this is almost like a Sufi who talks about Rasul, Fanafi Rasul. It's almost like Fanafi Rasul, but it has this resurrection element, which is of course in the Quran, it's in the Apocalypse of Zarathustra, it's in Isaiah. So we all agree on the resurrection, right? The Pharisees agreed on it, right? And his point is that the resurrection is more than just you'll be alive in the new world. Is that you become like the glorified version of yourself. What C.S. Lewis would say at the end of his book, Mere Christianity, is that you can become more yourself than you ever thought possible. He's like extrapolating this Pauline idea in a beautiful way. It's a nice ending to that book. But so I think this is like in and of itself fairly innocuous, and not completely untrue. I think there's some Sazakia and elevating, purifying the nafs and elevating the ruh. This is kind of that, and then you take it to the idea of like you're going to go, you want to do all this nafil, sadiqat, and interventions and jihad on different levels, not just fighting, and a lot of extra prayer and so on. And then you're going to go to Jannah gate number 4 or 3 or something, maybe higher than that, right? And it's going to be different from just partying and drinking from rivers of wine and having your beautiful spouse and so on. It's going to be something even more resplendent and psychedelically infused with divine closeness and all these things, right? So this is all cool, and this is kind of like he's kind of a mystic. The Miraj, like Mutazili, we're skeptical of the Miraj, and you don't really need the Miraj to have 5 prayers. Like you can kind of read in between the lines and into the night and into the afternoon, and suss out 5 prayers from the Quran. This has been debated to death by Quranists. Tend to land on 3, but you can definitely you can combine them as well with the and. It seems like you can combine them. So it's 3 to 5. It's fine. Personally, I tend to pray 4. I combined Asr and Maghrib, so it's actually kind of nice. I kind of slide into the sunset with Asr, then do my zikr in a few minutes where the crosses the horizon, then I do Maghrib, and it's like a longer session. It feels nice. But anyway, I get too far afield. So I think we're Paul, and then I'll conclude with this, and I, of course, I welcome your comments. I think where Paul gets things wrong, it's not so much to say that you don't need the law and that faith alone will save you. That's like a Lutheran and an evangelical sort of Salafization of Paul. He's definitely got a high standard of reasonably high standard of ethics that he expects his people to follow. But he does say it, and he created this exclusivism based on accepting this de minimis belief in the resurrection. And he shifted Judaism, not so much from following the law. Yeah, sure, for Gentiles, they're under Noahide laws. This was cemented in the mythological much later Acts of the Apostles. And it's probably true. It seems to check out. It kind of aligns with what the Quran says about Hanifs. These are people who, believe in God and they do good deeds, and they're not necessarily under a particular covenant with all of the ritual details and so on, and specific dietary things, whatever, right? So that's fine. I mean, these people are Gentiles. It's whatever, right? Like, I don't think this is a confusion that Muslims make because they somehow imagine that for anyone to get into heaven, they have to at least be on like some kind of rigidity of ritual covenantal practice that they are upon, right? But it's not the case. Actually, maybe you can go to heaven like drinking and laughing and not praying. You're sleeping in. You pray sometimes. You kind of. It's a lot more. It's a much lower bar, right? So that's fine. But this thing in Judaism, it didn't really exist. Like there are Jews who are kind of atheists, which is obviously is not good. But they still practice the Torah to some extent, right? Because they're like, well, it's like I might as well keep doing it. So I mean, this is like the opposite end of the spectrum. Is like this idea in Judaism of like akida was not really a thing. It was really all about following the law, and maybe like being a mensch, being to the extent that you do all these nice deeds for people and so on, in addition to the ritual things. And your big thing has been trying to denature people from this kind of Pauline, I would call it a Pauline interpretation of the Quran. And if you translate kafir as an unbeliever, then there it is. And you also have denier, which is more of a clean translation. But there's like a practical consequence of denial, right? For that time and place and then onward. So I don't think the Quran is completely on. We've discussed this. I don't think it's 100. Like I think it has a low bar, and it is lower than Paul with the resurrection thing. And he didn't say anything about a Trinity. Like you got to believe in a Trinity. It's just the resurrection. So Unitarians will still worry about, we should go try to convert Muslims to becoming Unitarian Christians, and it should be easier because they're Unitarian, and we just need to get them to believe in the resurrection. And it's because they're still hung up on this thing. And the political, there's also some anti-Semitism and whatnot, but okay. And we're anti-Judaism. Anti-Semitism is a more modern phenomenon. But the political wedge that religious exclusivism ultimately sunk in, and how it recapitulated with Muslims as well. We've seen a lot of that, Akida wars and sect wars and all these things, has been very negative, and it has occluded the beauty of like God wants you to be this radically generous individual of great akhlaq and sadaqah. That's like, yeah, sure, that's nice. We'll do that. But also, we got to really drill into people that they check these boxes. And this is, I think this is the great tragedy of Paul. Not so much all the other kettle of fish that people put in. Yeah. So that's my little presentation. I could have been shorter.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, Paul. I mean, maybe I should actually take some time myself to actually read his letters and his stuff, because I mean, I've mentioned this before. I haven't really read the Old Testament or New Testament. I've started reading. I started reading the Old Testament once a while ago, and it's just. I guess it's the opposite effect of how some people, when they read the Quran, they find who come from the Bible, they find it jarring, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When I go to the Bible after the Quran, it just feels very, very weird, to be honest. So I never got through with it. I do definitely prefer reading the New Testament so I've read the New Testament, like the Gospels, not the whole of the New Testament, but the four accounts. So
the New Testament is much closer to our Western literary tradition. Is part of it, right?
Yeah,
like these are definitely man-made these are all man-made texts, but and there is a Hellenic influence on the Tanakh as well. We don't really have archaeological evidence of people practicing Torah until like the 3rd century BC, which is like a big woo. But this is like a whole episode talking about interludes with
Yeah.
the OT. But yeah, like
Mm.
that's
So,
actually
like,
what's really
if I,
exceptional about the New Testament is that
yeah,
it actually is like the Disney religion. Like it is designed by
mm,
humans to be good storytelling
yeah,
that has pacing and feels. Um, I really like Gospel of Mark. It's nice and tight. Gospel of
mm,
Luke is much more humanitarian. It doesn't have the penal atonement really in it. It's actually subverting the martyrdom to be more about the ethos and standing
mm,
for that ethos. You stuck out James Tabor and Bart Ehrman on this topic, and then with Paul, it's more of like a historical documentation. And so
yeah,
you don't even really have to approach it as scripture. And then the question
yeah,
would be, well, why are Christians approaching it as scripture? Isn't that kind of weird? He's just some guy. Well, it seems like it's endemic to Christianity that they actually believe he's something. He's not necessarily a Nabi, but he is a
mm,
Rasul, right? And
mm,
he himself read from the book of Isaiah that there would be this branch of the Messiah, that he was that branch, and that this was his
mm,
job. He was like his destiny
okay,
was to be the Ray Kroc of Christ. Like Christ like
mm,
invented the salvation hamburger, and he was going to franchise it out all over
okay,
Mediterranean, right? And
yeah,
he did. And when you look at how the Quran affirms al-Masih, like the Messiah, not just Cyrus and David, Islam, and all these guys are messiahs, kings who have been
mm,
anointed by God. That's a category in Messiah, but that he's the Messiah. So this is the prophesied Messiah. And what's the prophecy? And Christians have all this tawil and they say, well, it's that God has this sort of the sun and it's all links in and it's
yeah,
the culmination of the fall and blah blah blah. Okay, well, we don't believe that. So what else could we actually say about it? Well, one of the functions of the Messiah is to make Israel a light unto the nations, so that I'm not quoting it perfectly, it's kind of poetic, but that every nation will know the words of God, basically. So
mm,
monotheism will spread, and you could make a historical contestation that Paul is inimical to that. You
mm,
could say that there are these more Gnostic, so-called Hellenic influenced brands that weren't so Pauline, but they're definitely influenced by Paul and they're influenced by the Gospel of John. Gospel of John is practically a Gnostic gospel unto itself in a lot of the way that it emphasizes. The Gospel of John emphasizes belief in a much bigger, and basically is the only one that really emphasizes like the point of Jesus is to believe in him
yeah,
rather than to follow his example
yeah,
in the synoptics. But I digress. So yeah, I guess it seems like Paul was an important part of the history of how monotheism spread. Um, and for that reason, throwing him under the bus is a little bit like rejecting all the hadiths. And maybe you've got, like, for instance, the message of the Injil is in the hadith of you will not receive mercy unless you give mercy. The guy says he doesn't ever hug his kids. So the
mm,
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that, right? And that's actually the Injil. Forgive us
mm,
our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That's that's the revelation. There's this formula that you
yeah,
you don't have to worry about if your salah was invalid. If you kind of just go through life being a good monotheist and being gracious to
yeah,
people, you will be treated graciously, inshallah. So,
inshallah.
um, inshallah. So anyway, yeah. So I mean, that's my read on Paul, is that maybe he actually he did enough good deeds. He might not even go to hell. Like,
Yeah,
he might just get by. He definitely made some big errors and caused some damage.
mm,
Um, and for
yeah. I mean,
those of us who
I'd have
do
to
dawah,
read into him. Yeah,
well, I would love to chime in on a later episode and like intertextualizing some of
yeah,
these things with the Quran
yeah.
could be
Would
good.
be cool. Would be cool. All right, I'm
This
gonna
is a
have
big
to.
part of like, what is the unique selling point of Quran-centric approach to Islam if it's not Quran only? And there's so many trash hadiths, and there are some good hadiths, but are they redundant? Well, so there are some that kind of give you a little extra something, and they're not. The matin is concordant, and it's a good supplement. But there aren't so many. But going back and doing intertextual stuff with Injil is I think a big source of
Yeah,
Usula Deen
I think so too.
reconstruction.
I think so too. I mean, I was, what was that that example which I found it is a very good example of what the Injil actually is in the Quranic sense. Is right after the verse about nafs bin nafs, right? So the verse in the Quran where God is talking about how He ordained for Bani Israel in the Torah that eye for an eye, right? And ayn bil ayn, wal sinna bi sin, and tooth for a tooth, etc. And so when you look at that verse, right, and of course the previous verse is just talking about the Torah, that we send down the Torah, etc., and then this verse says we prescribed in it for them that a life for a life, etc., right? And then the very next verse is وَقَفَّيْنَا عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ بِعِيسَى بْنِ مَرْيَمَ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ, that we brought after him Jesus, son of Mary, who confirmed what was before it, and we gave him the Torah, the Injil, right? وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْإِنْجِيلَ فِيهِ, in it is light and thing. And so when you look at the sermon, that Sermon on the Mount, right, it's very interesting that is what Jesus says. He says, basically, you have been told an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, etc. But I tell you, do not repay evil with evil, right? So that's
Don't even be angry with your brother.
Yeah. So I think that
You will have committed
those
murder.
two verses are basically contrasting the Injil with the Torah, exactly as how Jesus does in that Sermon on the Mountain, right? That I think it's in Matthew, if I remember, where he gives that sermon.
And that might be
this, but now I tell you this. You have been told this, now I tell you this. So he quotes basically the Torah, and then he says, "But I am teaching you this, and this thing which he is teaching there is the Injil," right? So that's shown in
so it's the difference between the Zahir and the Batin, right? Like if you're all Batin, then you go off like Paul did. You kind of go off.
A little bit like that.
40%.
Yeah, a little bit like that.
And if you're all Zahir, then you're like a lot of these guys that we see on the internet, and a lot of these countries that have been led into maybe not ruin, but moribund stagnancy. We may yet see a medical crisis in Afghanistan after years of just forced retardation of the populace, not the pejorative, you know what I mean? But blocking them from education, I mean. And that verse that you just cited, what chapter is that in?
So that's in Surah Al-Ma'idah. Let me
right.
just figure it out. So it's the two verses, 545 and 546. So
those are the 40s and 50s and 60s are the real money verses in the Quran for me.
So I think it really
ties everything together. But it reminds me of the verses in Surah Baqarah. I believe it's Surah Baqarah, basically about the same thing. Okay, if they kill one of yours, then you can go and get retribution. But then it follows up. But if you forgive, it's better for you, and that's the deal, right? So it's not like you have to take it, but like you get to have realpolitik, within proportionality. But what if you transcended that? Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, would be better.
and I'd say that would be great news indeed. It would be very good news. And that's the Injil for you. It's the Evangelion, the good news, and mashallah.
Injil, mashallah. All right, I'm gonna have to hit it now.
Yeah, that's a nice note to stand
on
on.
this. Yeah, nice word. No,
All right,
stand
mate.
on
Have a
it.
good sleep.
You too. Take care of yourself, and always a
Assalamu
pleasure.
alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. All right, folks. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a long one, but worthwhile. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.